All right, and we are on. So, welcome back, everyone, to I guess this is now a series of tier listing. So, me and Simon Amorum, great friend of the site. Last time we talked about UFC Brazil, which was phenomenally interesting, had a whole bunch of all time greats. And this time we're going to, I wouldn't say an underperforming part of the world, but certainly one that's opening up a lot more. So, we are in the non Russian Europe section of the tier list. So, Simon, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, this one should be fun. It'll be a different vibe than the Brazilian one, which was more emotionally charged, more investment. There's some fighters I really like in here, we should say. There's fighters
Yeah,
that are really interesting, really important. Um, but of course the Brazilians to us was kind of like
of
it was the
course.
yeah, they're the alpha and the omega. So
Yeah.
um,
It's not even like just to us, right? Like if you look at Brazil, there are half
yeah,
of the all-time greats in the sport come from Brazil. In
yeah,
comparison, Europe is a little bit, I wouldn't say worse, I would say lower down on the ladder so far. The like every English champion at this point is a real novelty, something real for the people there to hang on to. Or for Brazil, it's like, yeah, Brazil's got a champion. Like when don't they have a champion? So
yeah. Europe is it's this is more of a selection than the Brazilian one was, which we tried to include basically every like important notable fighter. It's a bit harder with Europe, and also what you count to put in the list. Obviously, we've decided to not include the Russians because they can probably be their own tier list at this
right.
point. Again, it is like really UFC career guys. It doesn't have to be your whole career happened in the UFC, but you have to have like some kind of substantial. Just because, well, maybe we'll do a non-UFC career tier list at some point of like the best
Yeah,
guys
guys who just never showed up.
who never came to the UFC. The Fedors, all that type of thing.
Yeah.
So for this, you have to have something substantial in the UFC in terms of like multiple fights, a good win, a notable win, that type of thing. And it does get a bit fuzzy when you talk about Eastern Europe, where you start getting to like the
Yeah,
steppe region and all those things.
yeah,
It becomes
exactly.
with Turkey and that type of area. It becomes hard. But I think the did we end up including the Georgians? Was that decided? We did end
Yeah, I
up
think the
including.
Georgians are in.
Yeah.
So Barov, Giga, and Topuria are in.
So Georgia obviously like super good in MMA right now.
Yeah, at this point they've had a real good drive.
Yeah, and I feel like it will continue. I don't feel like this is like just a peak that is
Yeah,
coming out of nowhere.
yeah, I think it's kind
So
of hard to tell because I don't know whether they have the institutions to support it or it's just like some Georgians randomly took an interest and went
well,
elsewhere.
the
But
thing is, it is all the good Georgians are like guys who just wrestled and then came to
that's true.
Longo or Topuria's in Spain, right?
Yeah,
So
and Giga's
um,
in King's MMA, which is just a fantastic camp. So
yeah, so they don't exactly have the home kind of growth, but they do have the wrestling
that makes sense. Yeah,
background there, which is obviously like helping all these guys with their background. So
yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah.
So
Anyway,
as for the tiers, you may have noticed we've cut out Great But Lucky, Great But Unlucky, and Goat. As I mentioned, it's a little bit trickier to find Goat tier guys for this, and I think Great is the sort of thing where just having like one guy as a fringe Goat tier guy, it seems more insulting with faint praise. So yeah, and Great But Lucky, Great But Unlucky. I think a lot of these guys, it's kind of harder to tell just because the entire area has been, a little bit less developed than Brazil, where you're not getting those sorts of perennial second, third best guys, and you're not getting like I think I said last time, it's like a chess tier list. You're not getting your like Anish Giris or like Fabiano Caruanas. You're just getting more
yeah,
like guys that are lower down. So they're
yeah,
great, but they're not, but for this X guy, they would be the number one. But yeah, everything else sort of stays the same. Great, they're great guys with real legacies in the sport. Solid contender. We're thinking top 5 to 7-ish in good divisions, or actually, I guess top 5 to 7-ish in bad divisions, and top 15-ish even in really, really good divisions.
hmm
Um,
yeah. You can even push like unranked, which is what ended up happening with like Trinaldo, right? Where
exactly.
he spent a lot of his career not ranked, but we
He
considered him
had
a
the
solid
potential.
contender just because the division was so good and he had the
Yeah.
potential. Yeah.
Action Fighter and Fine, they're kind of the same. It's just Action Fighter is the guy who he's going to have a legacy just for banger fights, and Fine maybe less of that, but still a solid guy. As we mentioned, this has been a little bit more curated than the Brazil list. We realized after the Brazil list that we actually missed someone who was reasonably not unimportant, which was Alex Cowboy Oliveira. But this one, I don't think he'd necessarily make it onto this one just for the
Yeah, I think we also missed another welterweight. We missed was it Warley Alves and Sergio Moraes? We both didn't.
Yeah, we missed those guys.
It was just kind of unranked action fighter Brazilian welterweights that slipped our mind there.
Yeah, I would have.
Yeah.
The thing is, there's not a ton to say about those guys.
Well, we could have talked about Warley Alves, Warley Alves submitting. Yeah, we could have talked about that, which would have been fun. Anyways,
but
it's not about the Brazilians anymore.
It's always about the Brazilians. But yeah, so Fine is just guys who were pretty good, made the cut for the list, but maybe not a ton more than that. And French, you will see it's kind of like the Gracie tier from the last one. So. Yeah, we might as well get started. So Andrei Arlovsky, Belarusian heavyweight, absurdly long career, former heavyweight champion. So this is a weird one.
Yeah, so he's definitely great for his country because he's the only notable fighter I can think of from there. He's definitely a super iconic fighter of his time. He's like around forever. He fought basically every notable heavyweight in history, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah.
Because he's been around so long, he's even fought the new
gatekeeper.
ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been around so long, he's even fought the most recent great heavyweights. So, yeah, and Fedor, obviously, like those guys way back then as well, right?
Yeah, he's got a 30-year career basically. Like I don't know if that's literal, but it might be like actually literal. He's been fighting since like the 90s.
Yeah.
So
he has points of his career where it's really bad, like long losing streaks and getting knocked out. So that's an element of it. But another element is that he came back from those a few times to win and be a gatekeeper guy.
And he just became a really annoying gatekeeper for the heavyweights who just wanted to, ironically, the ones who wanted to bang people out the most, right? Like if you look at the heavyweights he fought, I don't know, the last couple of years, right? Like he had really slow, maybe even main events against guys who just he would just exist at them for 3 rounds and they'd be very confused. So
yeah, they couldn't deal with how patient he was or something. He really didn't do much. It's a little bit like more on his opponents being bad than it is on him being good, even though people do love to give him credit for it. But in a lot of cases, it is just his opponents being really bad.
Yeah, and that's the weird thing is, if you look at a heavyweight who just has a really big right hand, like that's not uncommon, but he was conservative enough that people stayed scared of it for the entire fight. Like he'd only throw it if it was like a massive connection. Honestly, I wish he did more with the little back fist he did against Travis Brown, where he'd throw the big right hand and just pimp slap him. But that's a good adjustment.
Yeah. But, so he had good wins for his time in his prime, for sure. Like it's like Frank Mir, Antonio Silva. You mentioned Travis Brown, who was fine for that time. Right?
Yeah.
There's Tim Sylvia, right? So like these are fighters who are definitely like good fighters of that period of heavyweight. Even like Roy Nelson, if you want.
Yeah, Nelson wasn't horrible. Like he knew what he was doing.
Rothwell too. That was also an affliction. That was before the Fedor affliction KO, which sent him on like a losing streak.
Horrible skid, yeah.
Really one of his first like horrible skids, one of the first of the classic Arlovsky skids.
He had so many eras, it's crazy.
Yeah, he beat Verdum early on. That's like when Verdum was not like Cordero Verdum.
Right.
So he racked up a lot and is pretty important and notable. He is the progenitor of all pit bulls. They spawned from his seed.
That was the grossest way you could put that, I guess.
Anyways, so so I feel like great is fine for Arlovsky.
Yeah, I think Arlovsky definitely.
We're gonna put him near the bottom. But he has so many wins with like so many names and was around so long, winning so long, that I feel like it does look odd with him as the sole great right now.
Right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just kind of a thing where like he's a fighter who's greater than he was good. It's really tough to hang around for that long and be like, I wouldn't say he was consistent. As you mentioned, he had those skids, but he has been sort of a thorn in the heavyweight side for a really long time. Which, like that's fine. Like that's a role. And like even just having the physical integrity to do that, that's a big deal. You know, like he um, he hasn't been much of a test recently. I think he lost to Marcos Rogerio de Lima and Tom Aspinall without much trouble. But you know, sometimes that happens. Even the old have to get older than old before they look as old as they are. So it happens. But yeah, I think eventually we're going to get some Brits or some Europeans rather who pretty clearly beat Arlovsky out on the grade scale. But
Yeah.
right, I think this is fine. Like for heavyweight, he's pretty. Yeah, he's important.
Yeah, and he also one of the things that's fun, if anyone remembers this fight, is he fights Anthony Rumble Johnson when Rumble was just murdering guys
Right.
in World Series of Fight, just like taking people's head off, and he was just big as hell, and Rumble couldn't finish him. He got unanimous decision, so
Yeah.
he didn't win, but so
It's a
that's like
moral
a
victory.
that's a, yeah, moral victory when he fought the like super scary Rumble and didn't die. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Anyways,
we
we
can
can
move
move on
on.
to a really cool newer
Yeah.
fighter.
I mean, I think Arnold Allen. He's already proven to be a solid contender. Like, there's really nowhere else he can be as of this moment.
Yeah,
Um, it's like he's got a fight coming up with Max Holloway. If he wins that, he's just instantly an upper tier grade for European fighters, just because
yeah, right away. Yeah,
that's insane to do. I think the thing that's hurting Allen right now is just that a lot of his wins have weird caveats around them. Calvin Cater, that would be just a phenomenal borderline grade tier win if that was a little bit less sketchy with the injury. But
yeah.
that looked like a fight
Um,
where Allen was certainly competitive. Um,
yeah, Dan Hooker weight cut
Big cut.
is like, yeah, is that's a really tough one. Although I don't feel like Dan Hooker's like a hard fight for him
Yeah,
without
Allen
a
had a good
weight cut.
idea about that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then Sadiq Youssef, who's a
he's just a
good
fine
fighter,
one. Yeah,
but I think plays into Allen's strengths in a fair amount of ways,
that's true.
in terms of being, defensively liable at range.
Yeah, especially the southpaws. He did not like Alex Caceres doing his southpaw thing, if I remember correctly. He didn't like Feely doing his southpaw thing. Um,
No, Benito Lopez, is that the
I
one?
think
They
it was
had like
Gabriel
a
Benitez.
Gabriel
Yeah,
Benitez. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, mixing up a variety of consonants that are
yeah.
mixed with
But when
words.
we get to that tier list, we're going to be in some real trouble.
Yeah, I'm good. I got Gabriel Santos and Daniel Santos mixed up in a earlier discussion today. So, um, anyways, yeah. So it's just the wins haven't really like piled up. But to even be like where he is in featherweight, like those are still good fighters. Those are better fighters than a lot of people beat. A lot of
Exactly.
European careers don't have that amount of good fighters on them.
Yeah.
So, or decent fighters on them. So yeah, solid contender for sure.
Yeah, I
And
mean, like a lot of this is just also presumption on skill. Like I think Allen is certainly a top five fighter. Volkanovski, hard to favor anyone over him. Max Holloway over five at least. I think Allen's in real trouble. Callan Cater over five. I think if that fight didn't go the way it did, there's a good chance Cater takes over. But beyond that, I'm not sure there's anyone I'd really confidently take over Allen at 145. He's a horrible fight for someone like Ortega, KZ. Honestly, even like Topuria, like his game is really tricksy and it's hard to enforce exchanges on him.
yeah, Yair, they would be both at range, and Allen
Yeah,
isn't, I feel like, gonna take away it. So,
yeah,
and obviously Yair, the one thing he is like extremely potent at range.
yeah,
So, looking forward for Allen, there's not easy wins exactly in his future, but there's not also like impossible ones outside of Volkanovski.
exactly. And I mean, even like if he beats Max, I think he could actually be a reasonably tricky fight for Volk. Southpaw, kicky.
Yeah, I just think the cardio and like the
Exactly.
work of Volkanovski, he's a
Yeah.
demon, right? So,
Yeah, I think that's why like it really depends on the Max win, right? Like if he
yeah.
really levels up athletically somehow and goes with Max for five, I think Allen could be a real challenge there. But
Right, yeah. If he beats Max, then it would obviously change how you feel because he would have to do it in a way that, yeah, no, I understand you're
yeah,
thinking. Anyways, yeah, really good fighter, solid contender, and he's young-ish,
yeah, and he's got a super developed
and
game.
he's got a career ahead of him. So
Yeah,
definitely a guy who is most likely to go up, you could say.
yeah, and
Um,
he's honestly been really inactive, which makes it more surprising that he's already up here because he's fought like once a year for the last 7 years.
yeah, it's hard for British people to get like fights, I guess. We're going to
Yeah.
talk about a multiple British guys who
Oh,
had
for
trouble
sure.
getting fights.
Yeah.
So anyways, I think we can move on to
Boss
El
Rutten.
Guapo. Yeah.
Yeah,
I can talk a little bit about Bastard because he's a weirdo and I'm a
for
little
sure.
bit interested in him. So he's like a fighter who came from the like pseudo MMA shoot organization, with the leg pads and the open palm strikes,
Right.
and obviously did. He was basically in both. He was in like the submission wrestling style. He had this Dutch kickboxing style. So he was able to do multiple things for his time. Really well conditioned athlete for his time as well. And for MMA, he had more tools he worked on for his fights than most fighters who were like a right hand or
Right.
leg kick or something, where he would hit the body, he would switch kick, body kick, leg kick, like he which is, I know I'm just like listing 3 kicks, but this is like really
That's early
impressive.
times. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really impressive for back then. His philosophies around MMA, around switching stance and being in a wide stance or being in square stance, are a bit odd, and we haven't really seen them be implemented in any way that makes a ton of sense by anyone. But they definitely worked for him at the time, and that doesn't, there's a lot of styles that only ever work for one fighter, so
Exactly.
it doesn't mean it was entirely stupid. He doesn't have any like awesome wins. It's a lot of Japanese fighters I don't really know. Sorry to people who think like 1997 Japanese journeymen are like underrated as wins, but I don't know anything about these guys, and but there's Frank Shamrock.
Yeah. It's
But this is
definitely
like,
solid.
again, pancration. It's like not really MMA. It's
It's
like
close enough.
pseudo MMA.
Yeah.
It's close enough. It's probably more MMA than what like Tank Abbott was doing, even though that was
Right.
technically MMA, right? um, and then his best wins is like his like one of his final wins, which is the split decision over Kevin Randleman, who was like a good fighter.
That's a crazy one to
Um,
have.
but and then he ends his career early, is like the famous thing about him, or one of the famous things about him, is he has over 30 fights, but he doesn't like let himself fade. He basically quits on top,
Right, that makes
essentially.
sense. Yeah.
um so I feel fine. It's interesting because it's such old MMA. It's weird saying it's like great, because it's like literally not MMA. It's pancration, or it's like you know, it's
Yeah.
one of those. So, uh, but he's definitely was more than a solid contender because he was a UFC champion,
That
right? So
makes
he,
sense.
he
Yeah,
was
but I mean, I guess it's also that like if you're looking at guys like Allen, who you're sort of upping because of skill, it's kind of hard to look at like really early UFC champions, and
Yeah,
it's tricky.
I think solid contender then.
Yeah.
I feel he also didn't like, even though it was super early MMA, it's not like he fought every good guy of early MMA.
Exactly. Like,
He didn't like stay around to fight like a Nogueira brother or something like that, right?
right,
Like that, if he did that, I'd be like, wow, awesome, that's root. Put him in
right.
great, but he didn't.
Yeah, it's
So
just
yeah,
early MMA was also a little bit insular, where guys didn't, always cross over, and the best guys weren't really coalesced into one promotion yet, which is why you
yeah,
had situations like heavyweight with Pride having like half the best guys, or really like 75% of the best guys, and the UFC having like a couple. So it's
yeah.
tricky.
We should also mention a fighter who didn't get included and really isn't an MMA fighter, but is a kickboxer, is Semi Schilt,
Right.
who is also
Good
someone you
stepping
can't.
through.
He's like, he was insanely good as terms
Right.
of a
Yeah.
striker for the time. Like he would actually be probably good now as a striker for heavyweight MMA.
Right.
He was nasty, but that's like, you can't even count it. It's not. We didn't. I didn't think it was enough to count it as like a real MMA career, because it's only a few fights and he was a kickboxer, not an MMA
Yeah.
fighter.
That makes sense.
Anyways, we can move on to a great though. This one's
Yeah.
easy. Yeah.
Yeah, Bisping, obviously, especially relative to Euros. I mean, I'm biased. Bisping, one of my first favorite fighters, just fantastic. I think the thing is, if he didn't have that little late career run where he got the belt, a lot of people would consider him sort of a fringe, solid contender action fighter. Like even when he was champion, a lot of people thought he wasn't really a top 5 fighter, which I think is a little bit fair and also a little bit unfair. I think we saw a really short, like, peak Bisping was around for a really short amount of time. He was one of those fighters whose physical peak was like miles and miles away from his skill peak. When he joined Parillo, he learned how to really get behind his shoulder, sit down on his punches instead of just like a bunch of Sean Strickland empty volume. Um, he got genuinely very, very good. I think the Bisping from the Silva fight, the Rockhold too, that guy, he is I think today he'd struggle with a bunch of guys, but in a bunch relative to middleweight, like he wouldn't be Pereira, he wouldn't be Adesanya, he wouldn't be Robert Whittaker, but he would be right up against the rest of them. And for the time, I think I said this on the Brazilian tier list, I actually think he was kind of an underrated head-to-head threat when he was at his peak against the very best guys. You know, you had the guys like Chris Weidman, who really struggled with consistency, even if they had the skills to beat someone like Bisping, who was a lot more consistent, but a bit worse. You had Rockhold, who Bisping had some experience against and fought a smart fight against. You had Jacare, whose game actually made a lot less sense. Obviously, someone like Yoel Romero eventually kills him. Bisping had sort of a tendency to get hit really hard for no reason in the middle of a bunch of his fights. But he would put up a good showing. He wouldn't embarrass himself against pretty much any middleweight of all time. And I think that's like it's reasonably special for someone who started out the way he did. So I think definitely an all-time good middleweight, kind of a suspect all-time great middleweight, but that later run really seals it. Like that's it's not just phenomenal for like who he beat, it's phenomenal for how he beat them and how he got to the point to beating them, if that makes sense. Like, and you don't see that kind of like career revolution all that often. So phenomenal.
Yeah, you and me are one mind on this one, so I won't go on too long. But yeah, I think he is underrated. There's an idea of him that he was like a completely fraudulent champion because of the way the Dan Henderson fight looked, where it looks like they were very similar skill level. But that was not a great performance.
Yeah, he was well over the hill at that point, I think. Like,
yeah, but I think he was really good, and I think I agree about Yoel Romero that he would have gotten probably knocked out at some point, but he would have put up a fight. He is not like someone that would be scared of doing pecking volume on Yoel Romero,
right.
Hitting his body, jabbing, right? All that stuff.
All the clinch
his
stuff.
Little funky switch kicks that are kind of flicky that I don't like, but do some work. Yeah, and obviously he has like this very good run right at the end, which is him knocking out Luke Rockhold. So, and that's obviously like an awesome win, a great win over a UFC champion. And I think it's a little bit held against him how much he got walked over the first time. And then that the second time when he wins,
it was really short.
It was really short. And I think both are kind of a misrepresentation of that matchup, where the first time he does not come in with the right process at all. He's standing back way too far, and Rockhold can kind of just like kick him up, and he's not drawing out exchanges well at all, even though Rockhold was always willing to let you draw him into an exchange when he shouldn't be. So yeah, he gets walked over in the first fight, and then he knocks him in the second fight. So people go like, "Oh well, fluke. Rockhold was so much better." And I think Rockhold was better overall, but I'm not sure it's that much of a fluke or a gap between them. So I don't think he was a bad champion. They've not middleweight, but divisions have had a lot worse champions. And I mean, you can argue middleweight now with Alex Pereira.
As an overall fighter, it's really tricky.
Yeah, he was a great lucky on our tier list. So not a bad fighter, Alex Pereira, but I feel like Michael Bisping is a better overall fighter than that. So not even the worst middleweight champion of modern UFC history. So
yeah, I mean, I think it's also kind of the thing where we talked, and obviously the people on the video were not privy to this conversation, but when we talked about Peter Yan, you kind of talk about the whole idea of a skill bully, and Michael Bisping is kind of the exact opposite, where you can see someone who maybe he had a lot of trouble in terms of like doing things right, but he pretty much always had the right idea about his fights. He did things in a conceptually right way later in his career, especially. That's really what swung his fights, right? Like if you look at the Silva fight, you see someone who's just Silva in exchanges, he looked like a god. At certain points in that fight, he just beat the crap out of Bisping without trying whatsoever. But in between those, it was Bisping doing the work, figuring out what to do, and just consistency and. Like he had the right strategy for the fight, and it really showed. If more fighters approached fighting like him, I think they'd be a lot better, which is another thing that really makes him a great fighter.
Yeah. So Michael Bisping, I think the first real like confident great
for
of
sure.
the recording. Yeah.
Yeah, I believe
And
this
we
one would
can
be
move
Brett
on to yeah,
Johns.
Brett Johns.
Yeah, I can't. The fact that I can't see the top of their heads makes it weird whether this is Brett John or Jack Shore because I just
Yeah.
looked at the guy. But I think it was reasonably alphabetical somewhat. But yeah, Brett Johns, not a ton to say. I think he's doing well in Bellator right now. But yeah, solid bantamweight. I remember him getting crap kicked out of him by who was it? Pedro Munoz. Pedro Munoz
Yeah,
destroyed him.
he had a fun grappling fight with Aljamain Sterling, but
Yeah.
lost it. And then obviously he got beat up by Pedro Munoz. Although he doesn't get finished, so better
He
than Cody
basically does.
Garbrandt, I guess,
Yeah.
or something.
If
Sorry,
Pedro didn't
that
pull
was a
like
big
9
guy.
guillotines in that fight though, like Johns was done.
Yeah.
But
But he has wins. Tony Gravely submitted Tony Gravely.
solid. Yeah.
Joe Soto.
That was the heel. That was the
Um,
calf slicer, right?
I don't remember if Joe. Oh yeah, that was the calf slicer. Yeah. Montel Jackson, who's fine.
He's big.
He's big. He's got really big hands for hitting people. Um, yeah, so he was a bantamweight, and he had some of those types of like unranked bantamweight battles. He really got stuffed out of the top 15 whenever it came around for him to get a shot. But
Yeah, he's
um,
somewhere here. I don't like
yeah,
these
I'd say
two
it's
are kind of the
fine because
same.
he
But
never put on
yeah,
like he's really tough for sure.
but a
Um,
lot of the action performances were just at his expense.
yeah, at his expense, and one like really flashy submission.
Okay.
Even though it is awesome to hit a
He's
calf slicer,
yeah, and Joe
and Joe
Soto,
Soto, who's not a
fine win.
bad
Yeah,
grappler, so or at least not a bad BJJ competitor. So
right.
um,
Yeah,
yeah,
we can
fine.
move on to Crow
I
Cop.
like him though. I
Yeah,
think
Johns is
he won't be low and fine
yeah. I
because
don't
there's so many fine
yeah
Europeans who I don't like who will be put lower, and I'm
for
pretty
sure.
neutral on him. So um, he won't end up at the bottom. Okay, we can move on to a really awesome fighter.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about Crow Cop up and great.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd put him behind Bisping, I think.
Yeah, not
Um,
it's weird because heavyweight, like the thing about middleweight is that it has like 3 or 4 great fighters at any given time. Heavyweight, it kind of has like one or
maybe,
two.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
So
heavyweight, yeah, it kind of reduces as you go. It goes from like four, and then light heavyweight might be two, and then heavyweight might be one or
okay.
zero sometimes.
Yeah, but Crow Cop definitely one of them when he was at his best. Like that's
Yeah,
he had a skill
Krokop's,
set that would hang at any division.
yeah, Krokop's really interesting. His striking changed a lot when he came to MMA. He simplified. I don't know if simplified is the right word.
He pared it down to
He
mostly the
pared it
stuff. Yeah.
down pretty heavily. He boxed more in his kickboxing career. He uh he hit the body more with his hands, which he never really like bothered to do when he came to
Right.
MMA. He would just kick it because guys didn't know how to stop that. He didn't like there was this thing in kickboxing where it's like, well, if they are, checking your body kicks, you can like fake a body kick and then throw a right straight or a left straight right to their sternum.
Right.
But he didn't have to do that in MMA. He could just kick
They
guys in
just
the
didn't
body
check it
and
ever.
that would just be fine. So yeah, he figured out how to top game by the end of his career, which is pretty cool.
Yeah,
Classic
I think that's
old
how he beat
heavyweight.
Gonzaga in the rematch, right? Top
Yes,
clinch.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's awesome. It's really
Yeah.
it's nasty elbows from top,
Yeah.
which is kind of a classic heavyweight striker thing to do, which is figure out how to when you're old that if you get on top of a young heavyweight who isn't good, how to
He's
just
gonna
wreck
freak
them.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how to wreck them. Right, this is what Overeem did too to Sergey Pavlovich. Right,
That
it's
was
just like
cool. Yeah.
it's just like I learned how to crush guys because I'm so huge when I get on top of them. Right, so yeah, Cookup's awesome. His fight with Fedor is one of the highest level MMA
100%.
fights
Yeah.
for heavyweight ever, still to this day.
Definitely. And I mean, honestly, I think he's a pretty decent like head-to-head threat for a bunch of top heavyweights now. Obviously, he beat the complete shit out of someone like Cyril Gahn. He honestly be kind of tricky for John Jones. Just looking through the champions now, Jones wouldn't have a particularly fun time with someone who can kick that hard at range. Um, Ngannou, I can see that being. I can see Crow Cup getting knocked out eventually there, but I feel like
Gun is always like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to favor guys too strongly over him, but I do think Krokop will win minutes. He might be a bad matchup for Stipe Miocic, just because, a southpaw who hand fights away the jab and can kick him really hard.
And he might just be afraid of his general Croatian presence.
That's also true.
Stipe.
Just
He
a
doesn't
better
want to hurt
Croatian.
He doesn't want to hurt him. Um,
Yeah, I mean, Cain Velasquez, horrible matchup for him, and Cro Cop, one of those guys who really suffered from the cage when he came over to the UFC itself. Much
yes,
better in the
yeah.
ring.
Yeah, just a lot more experience in the ring. You could see the cage was maybe a little bit uncomfortable for him with a
Yeah.
kickboxing career in, in the ring, obviously, and then an MMA career where his prime was in a ring.
Right.
It's definitely like, and that's always a bigger transition than people think.
For sure. I mean, not even just the shape, right? It's that you have to wrestle against the fence, and it's a lot trickier to just like grab onto the rope than it is to like just.
Yeah, and he wasn't an awesome wrestler, but he definitely put more time into learning how to not get grappled than some certain modern heavyweights.
Yeah, he had some really good initial stage reactions at least, and that kind of carried him against guys who couldn't wrestle great. Like I think he had a loss to Big Nog earlier in his career. I think he would have beaten him in his prime.
Yeah, I agree about that. Yeah, it was. We talked about that in Big Nog's portion that he beat Cro Cop a bit early, and then Cro Cop probably would have won. Yeah, but yeah, really like storied, awesome career and a high skill heavyweight.
Yeah. And he lasted really long. I mean, obviously there's the steroids and where did he go? He went to Bison, right? And he just beat up that fat guy at the end of the tournament. But I mean, that's cool. That's fine.
Yeah. They didn't make him fight Jiri. That was cool.
That would have made me sad. But I mean, I guess Jiri could have fumbled. We're gonna get to Jiri, I think. But
okay.
Yeah,
this is the Hulk.
Jon Kutalaba. He's not getting above here. Maybe action fighters because all his fights are so silly.
Yeah, he will be like so low in action fighters.
I know.
Yeah, so he's not a good
just
fighter.
Not good.
He has like one of the worst brain thinking of all time.
Also, really horrible tank. Like just not good at that.
Yeah, he's like kind of supposed to be like a really aggressive, crush you when I get on top of you type of guy with like really powerful takedowns, but he just gasses himself out. And if you're not like really horrible from bottom, honestly, if you're not a really horrible grappler, he probably can't even take you down that easily.
Just gas out trying to
because he just he just shoots into underhooks constantly, right? So yeah, not a good fighter. Definitely an action-packed fighter. He's really bad though. I don't think he's good.
He sacrificed himself for the action. I respect it a little bit. Not enough to put him any higher.
He's so not like when light heavyweights are making it look like you really are like incompetent and you haven't trained or you don't know how to control yourself in like a space where you're supposed to be very intentional. That's a big problem. Yeah.
Well, he did have that recent main event though, since I think that was the card where Lewis and Spivak.
Wait, right. Is it like Nzechukwu or something?
Yeah, Nzechukwu. Yeah, that was a 3-round fight where he just got killed with like a knee.
Oh man, yeah.
That was fun. But yeah, now we get to Conor McGregor's worst nightmare, the great Joe Duffy. I say great. He's definitely not going to be up in grade. But I mean, pretty good fighter. He gave Dustin Poirier actually a couple scares on the feet when they fought, and Poirier had to end up grappling him. I think he became kind of old reasonably quickly, which is I think what hurts him. He got knocked out by James Vick and struggled with I believe Mark Takisi later in his career. But solid fighter, fun boxer, really good ideas. Maybe I remember him having like sort of that weird SBG flowy form, which didn't really help him a ton. But it was fine. He was solid.
Yeah, I'd put him above Kutalaba.
Yeah, just put him in tier,
he couldn't check leg kicks, which was a big problem because he came back to MMA when that was like the biggest rage, and he just got cash kicked in like all his comeback fights. Not really like a great grappler. He's one of those good for British MMA or like not British because he's Irish, but European MMA. Where it's like, whoa, he's getting triangles on these guys, and then
he can submit Conor McGregor, but what does that really mean?
Yeah, it's the Paddy Pimblett thing of like.
He did not make it on this list, and I'm happy.
No, we're not. He's not good. So, and he's not even. We're not putting him on.
He's an honorary French tier. Like we would have had to put another British but bad tier on the bottom.
Yeah. I don't know much to say about Joe Duffy. He didn't have like a super substantial career.
He was fine.
He was fine, yeah. And he did put on fun fights.
Yeah. Next we've got probably a 2-tier difference.
This is the most, this is the most
so controversial. He can be anywhere.
So I would put him in action fighter, because that's what he is. I don't think he's a solid contender.
I would definitely say solid contender, but this is
I
one where
don't.
we're like gonna
Okay,
argue.
so let me. I'll do my first because I like to
Yeah,
take charge.
we'll put it over there.
So Gamrot is a fighter who his game doesn't make sense.
Right.
He needs to constantly be attempting takedowns because he can't strike in a kind of any layer or deal with any of the ranges. He's not a good clinch fighter. He's not a good boxer, and he's not good at range. So he needs to be doing like transitional work. He needs to be trying to take you down. He needs to be punching into the clinch and getting out of it quickly. But he doesn't have the boxing to scare you and make you like cover up to grab the clinch or to threaten you enough that you won't see every takedown coming. And if he does get you down, he cannot hold down even the most mediocre of grapplers like Jalen Turner.
Right.
His game almost exclusively requires doing so much things so often that it is hard for the judges to tell if he got dropped or not. But it is almost always the case that he did get dropped because he doesn't even really have like, despite being like one of these awesome cardio guys, he doesn't have a great like chin. He gets rocked and then he gets recovered quickly. He like is really not able to grapple anyone who is slightly good. We put CDF and Action Fighter, I think, on the tier list.
Right.
I don't think he is at all in any way better than a prime Carlos Diego Ferreira. I like would resent that completely. Carlos Diego Ferreira was smart. His game made sense. He fought really well in matchups where he had to. And he would have beaten Gamrot in his prime by out-grappling him and being a better striker. So
Very
he should not be put in the tier above Carlos Diego Ferreira because he's not better than prime Carlos Diego Ferreira. He's not a contender because he can't beat top 15 fighters, and I think Carlos Diego Ferreira could. So this is my Gamrot. I don't want him in contender. I don't think he can beat contenders. I barely think Jalen Turner like just fought strikers.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, Jalen Turner became a top 15 lightweight by like just getting strikers.
Yeah.
Right. And then Gamrot gets like this layup where it's like, oh, the guy who can't grapple, and then he couldn't even beat him. So I don't even think he belongs in the top 15, to be honest. Neither does people like Grant Dawson, but he doesn't belong above Guram, Kutaladze, or other like competent unranked like light heavyweights. And to me, you have to be like top 15 ranked, or at least like threatening it in some major way. And I know he's ranked like 7, which is insane, but or 8 maybe.
Yeah, he's somewhere up in the 5 to 10.
He's just not that good, and he fights like style layups essentially. That like, I just don't like Gamrot, and I don't think he's very good. Like there was a thing after the Jalen Turner fight of like, well, Jalen Turner is sneaky troublesome because he's got all those knees and he can use frames. It's like Jalen Turner can't grapple. This should be easy. This guy got just crushed when anyone got on top of him ever. Matt Frivola just was like, this is easy, and Gamrot couldn't do it. It should have been a style layup. I don't care that Jalen Turner's striking is a little bit, nice for avoiding certain takedown entries. He should have gotten on top of him and like Kimura'd him super easily.
He did get on top really quickly too.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter because he can't do anything when he's on top of people. He needs you to be old Carlos Diego Ferreira, so he can randomly break your ribs. Yeah, or Jeremy Stevens on a 50 million fight losing streak. Gamrot is not a contender because I don't think he could ever beat someone who is like genuinely like a really solid ranked person. I can't think of like a lightweight, like a prime Jim Miller would just walk all over him. I think he would body kick him, he would counter punch him. It wouldn't be difficult at all. He would clinch him up. Like Dan Hooker was a prime Dan Hooker who wasn't a very good grappler, but kind of knew how to stuff takedowns and get to like front headlock things, would just not have trouble at all with Gamrot. I don't think it would be like super easy for prime Dan Hooker, and prime Dan Hooker wasn't that good. He's not good. Gamrot is not like a real top 10 lightweight. He's not a real contender. I can't put him in contender. I'll put my foot down.
All right, I will give the pro Mateusz Gamrot position.
Mine was like 10 minutes long.
Honestly, I don't have as much to say. I think
the Polish are going to be so mad at me.
Okay, we'll make it up to them with Jan Blachowicz, I think, or at least you will.
Oh yeah, I will. I'll definitely.
But yeah, I honestly think Mateusz Gamrot is kind of a fighter who's sort of low-rolled the matchmaking, if anything. He debuted against Guram Kutaladze, who was evidently just a fantastic fighter, and I do think Gamrot lost that a lot clearer on rewatch. just because of the thing you mentioned, right? His thing is just do as many non-damaging things as possible and hope it outweighs the couple damaging things that his opponent gets the room to do.
Or the
But
multiple times you get dropped.
yeah, it's a hilarious game. I honestly love it, but
It's not
not
even
because
like
it's
a
good,
Marab game where he like does kind of avoid a lot of
where he
damage
makes you stop
throughout the
doing
fight.
stuff. He just
Yeah,
lets you do stuff.
Gamrot just still gets his ass kicked the whole fight, but it's kind of a little hard to tell. But not even that hard. Anyway, okay, I'll let you go back.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point with Gamrot is a lot like the point with someone like Benson Henderson sometimes is like if they get robberies and they're able to consistently get robberies, it's kind of indistinguishable to just being good sometimes. Like, it's not to us, but in terms of like having a legacy and beating guys who, like being in a position to get good fights, and even like in terms of dictating the dynamic of the fight, like a fight like Jalen Turner, yeah, Gamrot got hurt really badly several times, worse than Jalen Turner ever did, and he definitely lost that fight. Like he lost every round, but it's still a fight where Gamrot's able to sort of dictate the optics really well, and it's interesting just because like there are a couple fighters who end up a little bit greater than they should just off those opportunities, right? Like if you look at even Merab. Aldo was a fight that he mostly won optically. If you look at Colby Covington, RDA was a fight that he won pretty much entirely optically. Gamrot kind of a step down from those guys, but I think it's also kind of a situation where.
I think he's more than a step down from. To be honest, like Merab put on a really good performance against Peter Yan and
I'm ignoring that.
And Colby Covington.
Had a Lawler fight at least. Yeah.
He fought some really old guys, but also I think he did win 2 rounds, a 4th and a 5th round against Kamaru Usman, which is like not easy to do. So those guys have done a lot more, and I don't like those guys at all, but they've done a lot more than Gamrot.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also kind of the point, though, is that Gamrot's kind of gotten tougher wrestling competition than those guys have consistently. Guram didn't look super hard to take down in their fight, but he did look really hard to take down against Damir Ismagulov. Looks like a fantastic athlete. Arman Tsarukyan, kind of a lights-out style matchup for Gamrot, like just someone who's just completely impossible to beat. And yeah, Gamrot didn't actually beat him, but that was also kind of a fight where I think Gamrot came out giving a little bit better of an account of himself, given the style matchup that Arman did, where, that's a fight that Arman should kind of be dominating 100% of the time, and Gamrot sort of let him only dominate about 60% of the time. And that was a fight where you'd sort of need to catch a knockdown for it to be super wide. And yeah, he did get knocked down, but, Gamrot doing Gamrot things. But yeah, and, Beneil Dariush. And I think a lot of my support for Mateusz Gamrot comes from the fact that I want Beneil Dariush to look good, and I'm completely transparent about that. But I do think he's a very good win. For Beneil Dariush is the kind of fighter who makes being kind of gassy and unathletic a really tough situation to handle, because you need to be. The thing with Mateusz Gamrot is it's really hard. Like, it's not hard to beat him for real. It's really, really hard to keep him away from his game in the way that Beneil Dariush did. And I think,
I agree that it's a really good win for Dariush because he completely shuts him out in a way. I mean, Arman didn't really have trouble with him, to be honest. It was pretty easy, but it wasn't the same thing. It wasn't like so clear how little Gamrot was in the fight like it was with Dariush, where Gamrot didn't look in the fight with Beneil at all.
Yeah, after like a round, it was over.
So I definitely think that he low rolled those matchups. It's just that
he did high roll Jalen Turner so much that it's impossible to overlook that.
And it would be like if he won that, I would be like, oh well, he's low rolled it against the grapplers. But then he fought a non-grappler and still couldn't do it. So I just don't think he can do it against anyone who isn't old and bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's also
because like who's worse grappler at lightweight than Jalen Turner in the top 15? There's no one who's as bad.
I mean, I think it's also just kind of a situation where Gamrot's like he wants to fight like a grappler, and he kind of looks like a grappler in the way he fights, but he doesn't grapple anybody. And his best win in quotes, I don't know if you can see the air quotes on the recording, but his best win, Arman Tsarukyan, is someone who he beat a lot more on the feet than on the ground. He didn't really beat him on the feet, but the rounds he won was a lot more on like 1-2 pace and like moving forward a lot, which again, like he's a fighter who the judges are built to love, which is really weird because he doesn't no-sell anything. He just like, he eats everything, looks very hurt, and survives. But I mean, I also think relative to CDF, you may remember I wanted to put CDF up in solid contender too, so I'm completely fine with Gamrot up in solid contender. But I think it's weird. I think it's a weird situation. I can't entertain him anywhere just because of the way his skill set is constructed. I think moving forward is going to be kind of weird. Like if you look at a fight like, I don't know, Gamrot versus who can he fight? Probably like loser of Gaethje Fiziev. Gaethje doesn't grapple him, maybe gets knocked out, but also maybe does his thing. Fiziev, same thing. Like
I feel like he just wouldn't take down either of those guys.
He just tanks a bunch of body kicks and like doesn't look hurt, but wins the decision. by doing
I
one
don't think
quarter
he
of the
could.
things.
I think those fights would start to look like the Dariush fight against like
Maybe.
low top 15. He can like steal fights against actual against like top fives. He just gets very clearly, no shotted.
Yeah.
And
I'm
Julia
glad
is
we
just like
figured out Armin Surukian stealing, and I'm glad it's very low.
I'm not even that high on Armin, but I'm very like angry about that decision because it's like
Wait,
so.
did we miss Armin here?
No, I think I looked at it and I decided that
Okay,
Armenia we would put with the Russian.
fair enough. Yeah, I
Um,
guess the Russian tier list is coming soon, but yeah, that's fringe.
yeah. Um, I would put him in the top of action fighter because that's what an action fighter is. I wouldn't
Yeah,
put him in,
again,
but if you think he's like the lowest lever solid contender of all time, I'm fine with that.
yeah, I can entertain either, just because like as I said, I think someone who robs people, but you can predict him to rob someone every single time he fights them, like that's indistinguishable from a real win in a lot of situations. Like I don't know, like
I
it's
mean, yeah,
super weird.
Ryan Wagner did do a prediction where he said that Jalen Turner would
Exactly.
win and Gamrot would, but it is different than because you mentioned Benson Henderson. Like Benson Henderson did beat Frankie Edgar for real
Exactly.
one time, right?
Yeah.
So it's Gamrot. It's not like he like fought Jalen Turner again and then was like, oh, I got it this matchup now. And it's only two robberies, right? It's just Saryukin and
Yeah.
Turner. And those are robberies in different ways. One is kind
One
of
is just
overrating his
vibes. Yeah.
pace, and the other is just like really I
Missing
don't even
knockdowns.
understand.
I mean, that's just the criteria. Like I'm pretty sure like everyone in the media gave the Turner fight to Gamrot somehow, which is insane to me. I don't understand it. He just has hypno, man. He's like Neil Magny, but when it comes to ignoring knockdowns, like if he gets knocked down, he just makes you forget it. He Men in Black like pens you, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. This is a weird one. I think either I don't know. I'll
Yeah.
go with Action Fighter,
Yeah. Okay.
but I think if we
I'm
fill up
happy.
Action Fighter a little bit, he'll be well. I think there's a decent chance we fill him up with like enough Action Fighters that I'm like, okay, this guy's a solid contender just because, um, like he's probably of a higher class than the rest of the guys we put here. Like, Kudalava's here. Like, this is a pretty big gulf. As much as we like
Yeah. The
don't like
thing with
Gamrot that
Kudelava is
much.
we don't have an awful tier to like
Exactly.
put awful but fun fighter,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
he has to be there.
Yeah. Actually, but we did Goram make this list? He probably should have. Goram is Georgian, right?
I thought. Oh, maybe. Shoot.
Damn. Okay, yeah. Well, I might go pick up a picture and like upload him later, but that's fine. But or I'll just stick this in MS Paint and put him in at the end.
Yeah,
But he's good.
he's Georgian Swedish. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I
yeah,
think
we should have counted Garam Kulaz.
yeah, Goram would be somewhere up here in solid contender.
I
I'll
would
admit
put
it.
him like a low solid contender.
Yeah.
He doesn't have any of the fights, so it'd be like entirely a skill pick.
Yeah, but Goram's fantastic. I guess this is our chance to talk about him, but maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Anyway,
French is
yeah.
French.
All right, this is
Great. I won't Gracie like I did for Royce Gracie. I will actually talk about why Ghana is what the French team is. The French is obviously the lowest tier. This is just a joke. But the reason why Ghana is in this lower tier, despite being one of the best strikers at heavyweight in a long time,
he's so incomplete.
Is a fighter who like such a deep disrespect for getting better or learning or like having any kind of knowledge or
Just has
thinking,
a disdain for
or
fighting.
he is what maybe we'll do a meta type of discussion on is like the skill bully incarnate,
Right.
where he is just like, I am a better striker, I am such a better athlete than all these other fat heavyweights. I'm just gonna, I do some defense, I have a jab, I can kick, I can actually do things, and I'll just kick your ass. And I will never once think intelligently about a single aspect of the
He just does the
sport.
bare minimum.
Yeah, he is just a kickboxer who is a good enough athlete to be a top level MMA heavyweight.
Yeah, it's just like he didn't fight anyone who. That's the thing, right? He's just straight up a kickboxer, and like I like kickboxers a lot. Like if you're a cool kickboxer who just gets taken down anytime someone shoots on you, like I'm cool with that. Like that's Alex Pereira basically.
Yeah.
But like this is a kickboxer who's not all that. He's good at kickboxing relative to heavyweights, but he's just thoroughly uninteresting.
And also, if
Like,
Alex Pereira gets taken down, it's going to be by like Robert Whitaker or
exactly.
someone who can wrestle,
Gon
and
is
he'll
going
at
to take
least have
himself down.
he'll at least have thought like, oh no, I really didn't want to get taken down. Gone is getting taken down by MMA heavyweights,
Yeah. Like, he's,
and is like surprised that they've done this.
I mean, honestly, that's the funny thing, right? Gon with his heel hook game, again, game in quotes. It's
Okay.
like there's no one more embarrassing to be taken down by than Cyril Gane, and Cyril Gane takes down Cyril Gane in every single fight. So that he's just not good. I don't have enough hyperbole for it. Like, that's the thing, right? The way that I described him one time is like Robert Whitaker without any of the things that make Robert Whitaker good. He's just Robert Whitaker's aesthetic on a complete blank slate, where he doesn't have the defensive wrestling, he doesn't have the compounding building game, he doesn't have the slick defense. He has the bladed stance that looks like defense sometimes, but he doesn't have the slick defense. He doesn't
Yeah, he
have the
can move his
positioning.
head in the pocket
Yeah,
proactively more than most heavyweights because again, he is a good kickboxer for heavyweight.
yeah.
But it's just like, yeah, it's just,
He doesn't.
I just can't stand to rank someone high who is
Yeah,
so not committed to actually being good
yeah.
beyond their one skill set.
Yeah, the real trick is
Um,
just that it doesn't build to anything, right? Like, if you have good defense, the point of good defense is to exist in exchanges and do things there. And if you look at Gane versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik, a fighter who should have been just 1,000,000,000% outclassed just physically, Gane was just like, okay, I'll jab you, and then I won't do anything else except jab you for the rest of the fight. Like, I am fine with boring fighters. Like, you saw how much I talked about Rafael Assunção on the last tier list. Like, that is my favorite kind of fighter, but Gane is just a tragedy.
yeah, he's kind of like the striking Ryan Hall, where it's just a deep disrespect for the sport. You think you can like come in and win with your one skill set and not learn anything other than that. And it's like, no, you're gonna lose the second you fight someone competent like old John Jones,
Exactly.
tubby old John Jones. He's just gonna own you instantly. So yeah. And
Yeah.
like Francis Ngannou with no knees was smart enough to be like, well, I'll just wrestle him.
Honestly, Gunnar didn't even do super poorly in the striking either. Like, I remember round one, and Gunnar was just like sort of chasing him around, landing body shots, and like Gon just he doesn't have a way. He's really athletic for a heavyweight. He's not particularly dynamic, and that's one way in which you can't really afford to do things. The way that Gon is that like he's bad in a way you see in lower weight classes, and that convinces people that he's good for heavyweights because he's bad in a different way. So like normally heavyweights are like kind of dynamic, but they're plotting, and they don't have like really stupid brains all the time if they're successful, but they don't always have the tools. Gon is the opposite, and people are convinced that that makes you better than the kind of clever heavyweight who just throws overhand rights. It isn't. Like, that's not necessarily better, and Gon is a good example.
Yeah. You
But
can move
yeah,
on to the. We can move on to the agenda. I'll call him.
yeah,
Uh,
this is all the way up here.
that's an
Uh,
inside joke. Or maybe we'll
yeah,
explain it. I don't know.
we will explain it. I mean,
Yeah,
I
you
honestly
could
think
do it.
Giga Chikadze is like
Yeah,
genuinely very good.
yeah.
Um,
I put him above Boss Rutan, I would say.
Yeah, I think honestly, Chikazi versus Allen is actually kind of an interesting conversation, just because Allen high rolled the Cater fight really hard, and
Hmm.
Chikazi low rolled the Cater fight really hard. But yeah, I think Chikazi he's a very solid fighter, really strong kicker, not like a super clever kicker, but he has ideas. It's actually kind of appropriate. He's directly below Crow Cop because he tried to steal the Crow Cop kick and call it the Giga kick. But
Disgusting.
yeah, that kick already had someone's name on it, dude. Like, what the hell are you doing? But honestly, like, I think he's pretty like the way that I try to put it is that like if you look at the current interim featherweight champion Yair Rodriguez, the way he won that belt was just spam left middle kicks at a guy who's way shorter and get taken down whenever the guy wanted to take him down. And Giga Chikadze, he sort of does that, but better than Yair Rodriguez does without a lot of the athleticism. So, he has some real systems around his left kick. He's not a horrible boxer. Like, there were some exchanges in the fight against Calvin Kattar where he actually did perfectly fine. He's crazy fast. He's pretty. I think he seems reasonably dynamic. In the Barboza fight, like, I genuinely had a pretty good showing. Like, Barboza, he's washed now, but that was directly off the Burgos fight. And Chikadze, just sort of southpawed around, confused him with lateral movement, snapped out fast straights, which like that's not super easy to do. So
Yeah. From his
yeah,
glory career, his kickboxing career, he has this idea of how to punch around a high guard, which is what in his moments of success with Cater, it was coming around the side with a
right.
left hook, fading or something like that. Um, And yeah, a good kicker, really strong kicker. He can't really do anything off his back at all, but the way he controls distance and has this kind of like don't come into my zone kick game where I'm just going to kick you really hard the second you try to step in,
Right.
is like a form of grappling defense. Yeah, I wouldn't put him above Allen. I don't think his wins are really all that better. It's the Barboza one, and then he has like a lot of real layup, like people who are
Yeah,
really
he has like
short. He
Jamie
plays a lot of
Simmons.
he plays a lot of short fighters who can kick from super far away. It was like the
Right.
UFC just loves giving him that really easy fight. Um, and yeah, it's just the Barbosa win, which is a good win.
Yeah.
And then getting like completely destroyed by Cater. So I think Allen, I like his skill set more, and I think his small amount of wins as well are still better.
Yeah. I mean,
So
I think it's kind of interesting just because, like, if Cater got injured mid fight, would we kind of be saying the same thing about Giga, where he has, like, the Cater win and a whole bunch of random mid wins? But also, Allen has Hooker, who's not horrible. Maybe he's at featherweight now, but there's really no way to tell. And I think Barboza is probably a little bit better than the guys Allen beat before Dan Hooker, or actually probably beat before Calvin Cater. So it's tricky. It's just that he has a whole, but like when you look at the distribution of wins, Giga has like one really solid top 15 win and then like a whole bunch of cans. Allen has maybe a couple less good top 15 wins and then like guys who are kind of solid in the unranked. Honestly, Max Burnell, we forgot to talk about that with Allen. So yeah,
that was kind of a two young guys fighting.
Yeah.
They both make a bunch of mistakes, but you can see how potent they are for young fighters.
Yeah.
Where they both guys really are like way better than they should be for that kind of early on career matchup.
Yeah.
He has like a split decision against Amr Khani. That's way back in 2017. Amr Khani's not very good, but I mean, he has wins in the UFC, so it's not.
Yeah.
That's better than I think some of Giga's.
That's also true.
Yeah, Arnold Allen has like a really bad fight with Nick Lentz. I remember like rooting for Nick Lentz super hard just because he like was doing well. Well, he was doing well to start, and he was looking like a little smart, and like he was coming with some veteranness. He didn't win, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think between Allen and Giga is pretty much just a skill consideration. Like, and I think Allen probably wins that fight head to head, so I'm fine with this. But yeah, I think Giga, like, he's honestly kind of a secret head to head tricky fight for a bunch of the guys at the top. He just probably won't get that kind of fight because of how hard Calvin Kattar owes him. So
yeah,
that's the agenda.
It's a hard loss to wash off. Is that is where Calvin Kattar's like chasing you around the cage, elbowing you in the top of your head.
He's just pimp slapping you for the entire 5th round. That's actually what happened.
Yeah. We can move on to Mr.
Gunnar Nelson. Yeah, for some reason this is in portrait where the other was in square, so it's easier to see. I'll zoom out. But yeah, so Gunnar Nelson, I would say, I feel like people would consider him a solid contender. I'm not super sure about it. Yeah.
I'd be a little bit more in the action fighter.
See, that's what's weird, right? Is that Gunnar Nelson, like, he never fought like he wanted action. Like, his fights against, like, his last fight was honestly completely horrible.
I don't even know. What was his last fight?
I think it was Takashi Sato. He just held the back for the entire fight.
Oh, Takashi Sato's in horrible fights all the time. I can't super blame him for that. I don't know if I've ever seen a fun Takashi Sato fight.
Fair enough. But yeah,
with Gunnar Nelson, it's welterweight, and it's not like a super strong point at welterweight in which he was around. So even though I think he was definitely top 15 for a while, I wouldn't say that counts you as a contender just because it was shallow. Welterweight is never super deep, 1 to 15. I don't feel like he is a significantly better fighter than a Gamrot. Gamrot just fights in a lot better of a division.
I think we have seen Gunnar Nelson just get kind of beaten up by the real elites of the division, right? Like he ran into Burns on his way up and lost pretty conclusively.
Yeah, that fight's fun mostly because of Burns being fun in it, more than it being Gunnar Nelson being fun.
Yeah, it was mostly just a clinch.
Gunnar Nelson's super tough, so he is in fights that have blood and stuff.
Yeah,
right? He's in that Alex Oliveira fight where he splits him open, super nasty, and that's definitely an action fighter finish. Choking a guy out just with a mask of blood. Like, You show
Yeah,
that to someone, they'll be like, that guy's action.
I guess that's what's
But
weird about Gunnar though, is that like if you look at a whole bunch of his fights, like Alex Oliveira was just Gunnar getting the shit beat out of him for like the entire first round while hanging on a leg lock. And if you look at the Leon fight, it's not a ton of fun, and Leon just does Leon things. Look at the Burns fight, it's not a ton of fun, except for Burns doing Burns things. Like if I were to be unkind, I would say he's probably not a contender, but he's also not an action fighter, and that would put him in the top tier of fine. But that just seems mean, which is really funny to say.
He is like a finisher fighter.
Exactly.
And he needs a finish
He's
in
finish
most
reliant.
fights, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's action.
Yeah.
I feel fine calling him an action fighter.
This
He has enough like UFC finishes that are neat, or
The Joe
or like
finish is
or
gorgeous,
him
too.
getting finished in ways that are like violent as hell.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, finished
and
by
I'm not
jab
going to
with
hold
taunts,
back
right?
like bad fights or like slow fights with Takeshi Sato. And to be honest, Leon Edwards, like people don't really
That's
have
big, too.
action fights with Leon Edwards. So yeah,
Yeah, that's fair.
he's finish oriented, which I feel is a component of the action fighter, even though it's usually only 1 or 2 rounds if things are happening.
Yeah, and I think
it's over
Alex
quickly.
Oliveira, Alan Jouban, a fine tier of wins to have at the top. I don't know, like at their best, I think both were probably like 10 to 15 if they got like good matchups. Both of those guys were pretty good, so I'm fine with this. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Alexander Gustafsson. This one is, if I were to go for a skill designation, this one would be hard. Where he is in terms of like light heavyweight is actually not that hard, but
yeah, I would say for light heavyweight, he's a solid contender.
yeah, I mean, I think like definitely a worse fighter than both of these guys, but
people would probably strongly disagree, but I don't really care too much. We can offend the Swedish today.
Yeah. I mean, we've already offended them by leaving Guram off, and I actually feel really bad about that now. But
So I think there's like a lot of he's so shot now, right?
yeah,
Is the thing.
it's not because of now.
He has such a low career that even people who would have said like, how dare you say him, even like they have kind of, the taste has soured just because of how bad it is recently. So I'll say something nice about him, which is that he has really, really close competitive fights with 2 like all-time greats.
For sure.
Daniel Cormier, John Jones. They are close fights. Daniel Cormier a little bit less. He gets beat around the clock for a large part of the fight, but then he almost finishes him, right? So, and he's like super tough throughout the whole fight. He's really like not going away at all.
Yeah.
And then he completely like walks through what's considered a good modern light heavyweight, like Glover Teixeira, right? Just not difficult at all. It's a horrible fight. He does nothing for most of it before like just unloading an uppercut spam combo to wreck him. So if you think there's a single good light heavyweight right now, you have to say that Gustafsson is good.
Is probably better.
Good.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
Is it like Gustafsson? He holds up at current light heavyweight for sure. Like I think he'd be a bad fight for probably Yuri Prohaska. He was demonstrably a bad fight for both Glover Teixeira and Jan Blachowicz. I mean, Jamal Hill, I'm not as sure about because Hill has some like room to do, like to be better.
I don't have strong opinions about that type of matchup, but I think against a bunch of those guys, he fought Jan Blachowicz in like both of their relative primes, and he didn't really want to strike with Jan Blachowicz. Is the thing about that fight. He leans more on not doing things and wrestling. So he is not an awesome striker, but he was like well-rounded, and he came from a smart camp. I like All Stars, right? That's the camp. I think they like teach guys to be well-rounded and to fight their fight. So solid contender.
Yeah, man. I think the weird thing about Gus is that you can really solidly call him one of the most overrated fighters in terms of skill at a certain point in time. He was
people thought he was like a top 5 boxer in MMA.
He just had incredibly messy footwork, just couldn't be pushed back whatsoever, but without the dynamism that made Barboza kind of afford that.
He had like 4 punches. He never really wanted to. Good like jabbing 1-2 performance.
Yeah, he had like hooking off the jab.
Right. Yeah. He did more counterpunching in that John Jones fight than he did in a lot of other fights. Obviously that's like the career best performance
Right.
it's one of the most famous fights of all time. So of course,
Yeah.
both sides of it have to put on a good fight,
Yeah.
and that's more than most light heavyweights
Yeah,
do.
exactly. Like I
Yeah,
think he's super overrated in terms of like pound for poundness, but he's not really overrated in terms of like heavyweight standing, which is a funny spot to be in because like that's a spot where you tend to get like the Jones and Cormier in similar spots. Gustafson pretty markedly worse than both, but you know he was good. Like he was functional. He was athletic enough to hang. He was durable. He was tough, and he had a game that it didn't make sense to a lot of us, but it made sense to him. So we're all
yeah,
good.
yeah,
But yeah, next we've got Joaquin Hansen,
yeah.
another one of the
Hellboy.
kind of older guys, but super violent fighter. I don't really have that many takes on him. I think he was pretty good, but also sort of a problem with the earlier times, just not really having a ton of the wins. Uh,
Yeah, I love him in terms of old MMA. I have a
yeah,
bunch of DVDs of Pride events, and I whenever I go out to like used DVD stores and look for old UFC events, if it's one with a Hansen fight on the back, I'm like getting it because they're
for sure.
always going to be awesome.
Yeah,
For his time, a fighter who had this similar to Charles Oliveira or Cheeto Vera, where every single thing they tried to do in a fight seemed like it hurt so
right.
much. He
Yeah,
would calf kick guys super hard, knees to the body, elbows. Whenever he hit guys, it seemed like he was just a nasty puncher.
for sure.
Um, Punched into the clinch, into knees, a little bit Verdum esque. Wasn't like a great grappler, but he was very good at punishing guys for getting sloppy on the
Yeah, he had the
ground.
knees, right?
Yeah, he was great
Yeah.
knees. He knocked out uh, the Japanese who does the Imanari. He knocked out
Yeah.
Imanari
That's the one I
with a
remember. Yeah.
counter knee. Yeah, it's a super amazing. You know,
Thing that should have
there's a
happened to
lot of
Ryan
guys who
Hall.
couldn't figure out. Yeah, there's a lot of guys who couldn't figure out how to do it to Ryan Hall what Hansen figured out all the way back then. So, um, yeah, I really love his style. Super fun. Yeah, action fighter. He doesn't
Yeah.
really have like awesome wins, and it is a long time ago.
Yeah,
Um,
let's say, I guess worse than Gunner because he was in a worse division, or not a worse division, but a worse time. But yeah,
yeah,
let's
yeah,
see.
and he has a lot of losses that don't look
Yeah,
super good either.
yeah. But
IOP and those are later, but yeah, he fought a lot of great fighters though, like Eddie Alvarez,
oh
IOP.
yeah, for sure.
He fought Bibiano Fernandez, which is that's like that's a real throwback 2010s dream type matchup.
Yeah, that's actually
That's the
kind of
kind of thing.
wild. Yeah,
That's the kind of thing that nerds like me love talking about. Love talking about Dream 10, Hanson, Bibiano Fernandez. I don't know if that was Dream 10 or not. I feel like it might have been. Anyways, yeah, I like him.
yeah, he was
Shout
cool.
out to
Definitely.
yeah, shout out to him. Hellboy, great nickname. Awesome nickname, I
That's
should
also
say.
true.
I
Yeah.
love that nickname. Okay,
We're on
Mr.
to
Dan Hardy
Dan
next.
Hardy. I think he's kind of the definitional fine. Um,
Yeah, that's what I was.
he had a left hook, but he also got out left hook by Carlos Condit. Like that's fine. That's not embarrassing, but he also doesn't really have wins. Really bad grappler. He spent pretty much the entirety of the GSP fight where he ended up with the GSP fight kind of like how like DJ ended up with a bunch of random title defenses. The division just wasn't in a great spot with GSP beating everybody. So he just kind of got grappled for the whole thing and got remembered for getting armbarred but not tapping. So like fine, like he wasn't terrible, but he'd also not really hang at a current welterweight, I don't think, which is funny
Mhm.
because he's been talking about coming back for the last like 12 years. But
Yeah, it's interesting. He came into the UFC with this kind of Cage Warriors backing, something we still see to this day,
yeah,
where you get a little bit of that Cage Warriors bump for being a
yeah, I think the
Brit.
next guy's that too.
Yeah, for a Brit. I don't remember if Gary comes from Cage Warriors or not. Anyways, yeah, it comes with that Cage Warriors bump, that fan base that'll come. Which shout out to them. They support their fighters. And he gets 4 wins when he comes in the UFC, I think, in a row. And that's like, oh, he's here, he arrived, he's a Brit. And I think everyone at the time knew he didn't have anything for GSP. He might have even known he didn't have anything for GSP. um, and then he has that fight, which is like one of the most undeserved title shots
Right.
ever. He does it off of beating Mike Swick, who I'm not even sure was ranked when he beat him, or
Yeah.
if I don't know if they didn't have official rankings back then, but I don't think Mike Swick would have been ranked at all back then.
And yeah, Swick was I think Swick was the guy with like a bunch of quick knockouts, and then he just never did anything again, right?
Yeah, he does like AK Thailand now or something like
Right.
that.
Yeah, I heard he
Yeah.
recovered from cancer, so I don't want to say bad things about him. That's
Yeah,
super
no,
cool.
he's a cool guy.
Yeah,
He's probably a good striking coach.
yeah,
Anyways,
but not that kind of win. Yeah.
yeah, so then he loses to George St. Pierre in an insanely one-sided
Right.
fight. It's like a classic Demetrius Johnson-esque type of thing where he almost gets finished like four different times. Um, yeah, it's not a competitive fight. He shouldn't have gotten the title shot. And then he loses Condon, Rumble, Chris Lytle. He goes on like this 4-fight loss streak after getting this undeserved title shot. And then he has like 2 low-level fights and then retires. So he really
Yeah.
just doesn't have a lengthy career. He doesn't have any good wins at all, and or any like wins that I'm really like, oh, that's awesome. That's an awesome win, or that's like even
A
a
great
good win.
performance. Yeah.
Yeah, and is one of the most that George St. Pierre title shot adds so
It's
much
so silly.
undeserved legacy to his name.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, he was, he also just, he'd lose to like Michael Chiesa and he'd lose to like a bunch of guys. He's just not a good grappler. Um,
yeah.
Sort of single-handedly responsible for the Brits can't grapple thing. Not really, not actually, but he contributed to it.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was definitely a poster boy for the not Brits not being able to grapple. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, can't really put him lower than. I guess you can put him lower than Brett John's worst division, but I don't think I will. That. Yeah, Ian Gary.
Yeah, I actually might put him lower than Brett
Um,
Johns. Brett Johns beat like fighters I kind of like, at least a little bit.
oh, that's fair. Like, yeah, Tony Gravely actually
Yeah,
went up in my estimation a lot after that Victor Henry fight, so
yeah,
fair enough.
he's a fine fighter. So, yeah, no, I'm not the Brett Johns higher. Sorry to all the, what do they call it? Reptile, full reptile, whatever.
The Dan
Dan
Hardy
Hardy,
heads.
yeah, all those people.
Hardy
Yeah.
for Hardy.
Anyways, we can move on to a hoofed fighter that I can be biased about.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Gary's not bad. I think
Yeah, he's an action fighter.
yeah, right now, I think he could definitely be something more. But as of now, I'd put him somewhere around there.
Yeah, he's like a Duffy tier.
Yeah,
It
he has
doesn't
some
really matter
upside to be
which
better,
way.
but
Yeah.
I actually really enjoyed the fight with who was it? Song Kinellan? I think it was Song Kinellan. But
Yeah,
his last
it was his. So he's definitely an action fighter because he can't avoid getting hit.
getting hit really hard.
But he has an offensive game. He has like a hoofed game. There's front kicks. There's jabbing to the body. There's putting nice combinations together. It's a little bit of pressuring.
Yeah, he has
Sometimes
nice
you'll
form.
take a moment to do a little bit of easy countering, right? If a guy's really like gonna
Yeah.
fall into your left hook, just fade back into a left hook, or little like cross counter, that type of thing. So yeah, he's got a game that makes sense as a striker. I feel like he probably isn't a great grappler. It's
That's just
pretty
our Dan Hardy bias.
Yeah, it's pretty like, although Hoof, they there's some like borderline competence that they always get you to in that area. Yeah, he can move up because he's not too old, and he's at a good camp, and he's a good athlete, and he's big, and welterweight isn't super awesome. So I feel like maybe he can become low solid contender at some point.
Yeah, I mean, in his welterweight, like there's
and he's gotten better over
there.
the short UFC career.
Yeah, he looked like a really good swarmer in that last fight. Like, yeah, he got dropped, and defense tends to be the last thing prospects really get. But he looks like a pretty solid offensive fighter. Like how he worked around the guard of Song Kinellan after getting dropped that first time, and he adapted really nicely around that left hook. Right, like that's the kind of fighter who, like, if he gets you once, he shouldn't ever get you again. And Ian Gary,
that fighter literally only has a left hook.
And at that point, like when you get got once, the best you can do is not get got by it again. And Ian Gary did a good job, is drawing it, punishing it afterwards. The body shots were nice. The finishing combination was nice. So yeah, I'm cool with him. He seems promising. I think one of our staff members, Lukash, has been really down for him for a really long time. So I think he's been redeemed on that. Like he's a good welterweight.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say, I guess, if you look at welterweight, like the top tier prospects, you have Shavkat Rakhmonov above the rest. I'd say Jeff Neal, Jack Della Maddalena, but he's not insanely far away from them.
Yeah, and welterweight has late bloomers too, so you can't really like always count guys out totally. You have like Bilal Muhammad, who figured out what he was eventually, but looked like he wasn't gonna ever be any kind of threat
Exactly.
earlier. I can't actually see who this is, so you're gonna have to tell me on this one.
Yeah, I
It's very
actually don't know
tiny.
because I just added directly from the list. It might be Paul Sass, but I don't actually know. Um, let's see. Is
I
Paul
don't think
Sass anywhere else
I
here?
don't think it's Paul Sass.
It might not be Paul Sass. No. Yeah, I just added everyone from your list. But yeah, we'll skip him and come back to him, and I'll rule it out using the list. So Ilir Latifi.
Yeah, okay. Elia Latifi.
It's just an old picture. This is just super weird.
Yeah, I can't even. I don't even know who that is. We have a mystery fight. Someone's gonna
I was
know
so
who it
first.
is, and we're gonna be embarrassed that we put a thing on here we didn't know. Anyways, we can move on to Latifi. I don't mind.
Yeah, Latifi probably definitionally fine.
Yeah,
Um,
fine. Yeah,
I liked him though. He was chunky. He was cool.
yeah.
Did some decent wrestling things. Beat
Little
uh,
barrel. It couldn't
yeah.
strike, but had power because he look at him.
Yeah, honestly, he didn't even really have some bad ideas. I remember that OSP win. That was back when people thought beating OSP was like actually kind of a big deal.
Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah. He approached that fight correctly for
yeah,
sure.
I remember that fight just because OSP he kept wanting the open stance, so Latifi switched. OSP switched back, and Latifi just kept switching for some reason. That was just so funny. But yeah, and then he just burst in with the like a little body head combo, I think, which is nice. Like Latifi, the kind of fighter who he didn't like have great habits, but he was dynamic enough and he wasn't stupid. Um, which was kind of the contrast with like Corey Anderson. In that Corey Anderson fight, like Latifi would just hit him super hard occasionally, but just get out processed. So fine, solid.
Yeah. We can do the next one, which is Jack Shore.
Yeah,
The
Jack.
other Welshman,
Yeah, I mean,
the
I like
Welsh
Jack Shore a
featherweight
lot
this
actually.
time. Yeah, he's good.
Yeah,
He's well rounded. He has a simple game that makes sense. He
yeah,
uses his
solid little
jab. He
jab leg
uses
kick
his
guy.
length. Yeah. He's not really dynamic in many ways,
Yeah,
but he approaches. He's not doesn't have awesome defense. He has a little bit of a tall man
without
defensive
really being all that tall either.
identity. Yeah.
Yeah,
So he's not too old. So yeah, he's only 28 years old. So he can improve into a prime, into like a early 30s
yeah.
prime.
I mean, I'd say like top tier
Yeah,
fine right
yeah,
now.
top tier fine. Yeah,
Yeah,
he reminds me a little bit of the like Moises type of area
yeah.
we had for last
Yeah,
time.
I think he's
Yeah,
probably more promising than Moises because he hasn't taken that many losses. But I mean, Ricky Simone, like not a bad. I think Simone's probably like a future top 6 or 7 guy. So like that's not horrible.
yeah.
But yeah,
He beat up Valiev, which is you want to see because
yeah,
if you should like a guy like him should be able to like poke and jab and 1-2
exactly. Just stay
someone like him or
active.
Valiev. Yeah.
You shouldn't be volume
Um,
frauded by Valia if you're someone like Jack Shore.
Earlier on, he didn't look as strong, but I think he's also improved. Despite him coming off a loss, I think he has improved
Yeah,
in the UFC. He's going to fight Amir Khani.
yeah, he's
I,
moving up
I'm
a weight class. So.
Yeah, moving up a weight class to fight Amir Khani. Amir Khani can be a big featherweight, so that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah,
Or
but
at least
also
like a featherweight who will like use all his strength to body slam you and get on top of you early in a fight. Um, yeah. So, anyways, I like Jack Shore. He's fine.
yeah, Jack Shore's pretty
He's in a
solid.
good division, so you always kind of have to respect the guy who has wins in a division like
Yeah,
that.
like fringe top 15 at bantamweight's nothing to really
Mm-hmm.
be mad about. Yeah, Jack Hermanson, I would say
Hmm.
janky as hell, but has a couple of decent wins. I mean, Gastelum's not nothing. Jacare's not nothing. And that Jacare performance actually impressed me a lot. Um, beat Dave Branch really quickly, but I don't know. He
Yeah,
just, like, I've
I
never
would put him
felt,
around the Gunnar
yeah.
Hansen tier
Like,
because I feel like he should his game is he still has more things to do and more traits that would put him above like a Gary and a Duffy.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, he's not a fighter I super love. He can't really deal with southpaws at all
yeah,
because he's so reliant on his lead hand. Um, he's been relying on his chin in the past, which that might be fading more and more.
yeah,
He's super cardio freak, really tough. The Taos fight, obviously, where I think he
of course.
dislocated his rib and gets the finish anyways. Um, yeah, the Jacare fight, old Jacare, but uh, a veteran intelligence Jacare still, who
Yeah, and like Jacare turned into a striker who'd be a bad matchup for Hermanson on paper. A guy who bangs the body and marches forward.
mhm.
And
And he was able to move around him, and
yeah, occupy him
yeah,
with the lead hand, do a lot of slick stuff like that. He looked
he
like
really struggled against another like volume fighter like Vittori. Um, he
Yeah,
wasn't
also the
able to.
southpaw thing, but yeah,
Yeah, also a southpaw thing, and then against a guy who always comes in with a plan in Cannonier, just didn't have much trouble at all. Was like, well, you're two of us. It was a straightforward idea, which is
yeah,
you stuff the takedown, you take away the lead hand, you counter him really hard, and it was pretty easy for Cannonier. So
yeah.
he's not an awesome middleweight. I wouldn't even really call him like a he would have a bad title fight attempt middleweight. Like he's not even a
Yeah,
Vettori tier.
he lost to
He's
Roman Dolidze recently, so
yeah,
that's
he lost to Strickland, right? Was that?
yeah, he did.
Yeah, he lost to Strickland, which is one of my least favorite things someone can do. Uh, so yeah, I don't. Yeah, not a. I don't love Hermanson, but he has fights where lots of stuff happens, and
Yeah,
I think you might be able to argue he's only fine just because he's. It's not like
he doesn't
it's not like
have
he's like
great fun
rocking
fights.
anyone
Yeah,
ever. Yeah, I feel like fine and around and above Jack Shore is probably a little bit better. Yeah,
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, I think
yeah. That's where I would put him. I think.
yeah, the weird thing about Hermanson is just that like he has a bunch of attributes, but he's also just like unreasonably jumpy through the entire fight. Like you can see him freaking out in the middle of every fight for some reason. And that's really what was so funny about the Cannonier fight, right? Like you have Cannonier who's just ice cold, whether he's winning or losing 100% of the time, and you had Hermanson just like putting pecking volume on him, but you knew for sure he would die at some point in the fight. Like it was just an inevitability. I remember after, I think I watched that fight with Ryan on voice chat, and I was like, "This, I actually feel pretty good about betting on Cannonier." And Ryan's like, "Why? Like nothing's happened yet." And Cannonier just killed him instantly. But yeah, a fun fighter, but nothing too special. Just basic skill set. I mean, fun top game. Like middleweight doesn't really have a bunch of top game guys, but he has a real knack for ground and pound, which is the one thing that he can really say about himself as like elite. But not a great system for getting there. But yeah, we'll move on to Jan Blachowicz. I think honestly, I'm not.
Yeah, it's hard with Jan because he's honestly one of like the luckiest
Exactly.
guys in one of the luckier champions. Super weak time for light heavyweight. Obviously, like someone like Glover Teixeira was better than him, beat him to become a champion, and Glover
Right.
Teixeira not as good as Alexander Gustafsson.
Yeah. And he lost the Gus fight head to head too. So
yeah, and he lost the Gus fight head to head. He would have been better later, I think. Because Jan did improve after that Gustafsson fight in a lot of ways. I'm a huge Jan Blachowicz fan, I should say.
same.
Like, I really love Jan. He's an old man. He kicks insanely hard. He punches insanely hard. He doesn't have much cardio. He has an insane like squeeze, even though he can't really grapple much besides his like light BJJ game. But he just has old man strength, old man power, old man toughness. Yeah, old man brain. He's a counterpuncher at light heavyweight, which is a pretty rare archetype for a lot of light heavyweights. He has a win over Dominic Reyes when that was like the hottest win you could get at light heavyweight, basically. The man who beat John Jones.
And beat Israel Adesanya, who like you can't even really blame the size on that one because Jan did perfectly fine on the feet for rounds at a time.
Yeah, so he's a fighter who has some kind of strange qualities. He's a little bit of a random puzzle pieces that you're trying to stick together, but they don't fit perfectly. But I love that old man kickboxing game. He's got that old man toughness, all that power he has in his hands and his feet. That's so ridiculous watching him like kick Dominic Reyes's ribs black in only like a couple rounds. Watching him kick Ankalaev's legs off at 40 years old. He's still good for light heavyweight now, just because light heavyweight is so weak.
He's physically declining for sure.
Physically declining, can never really grapple, can never really deal with certain archetypes, guys who have like intelligent pressure that can kind of like draw out his counters. He does have a win over Beeston. What's his name? Corey Anderson, right? Yeah. Knocks him out, and Corey Anderson beat Glover Teixeira, right? So and beat Glover Teixeira super clean. So there is an element of like that. Yes, he lost to Glover Teixeira, but there's like because of light heavyweight's weaknesses, you can lose to a guy really cleanly and still be the best, just because that guy loses to more other people than you do. There's a little bit of like that triangle of, it's a rock paper scissors type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with Jan is that the thing he reminds me most of is sort of a light heavyweight Bisping. You like, not in terms of like actual style, but more in terms of career path. You know, you have this guy who's not really all that great and mostly just won on enthusiasm early in his career, but you know, he eventually developed that nice jab, and that took him away from being so aggressive and having to put himself in the fire all the time. And it peaked with a pretty decent run later in his career against some solid fighters. I think him beating Izzy is like, it's a genuinely impressive feat. Like, I think there are a lot of light heavyweights who struggle a lot more, and Jan having actual kick defense, like for real, like pound for pound tier kick defense, is it's a really funny, like, random skill to have in a division where there are no good kickers. So yeah, Jan, I like him a lot. I think I just have no idea where to put him, right? Because if I put him up in great, it feels like I'm seriously overrating him, but he was a champion.
Yeah, I feel like the low of great is fine. Just because he picked up enough
Exactly.
wins, I kind
It's
of like, and he has like a high skill level for his division, even though he isn't like a totally legitimate champion. Like, Israel Adesanya is a great win. Like, that's a great fighter. So
yeah. And I mean, I think it's also kind of interesting because like he seems like sort of the thorn in the side to a lot of the current light heavyweight contenders. Didn't beat Ankalaev, but like he could have. There's a universe where, like, he was training for a 3-round fight. Over 3 rounds, he just shuts Ankalaev out. Like, you know, I think he'd do fine with Jamal Hill if he ends up with that fight. It's pretty much just Glover Teixeira, who's a horrible matchup for him because of the pressure and the wrestling. But like, yeah, it's weird because like putting him above Gustafsson, it feels a little bit wrong. Just because Gustafsson got a little bit unlucky where he was in a division with the same people, but those people weren't the best around. Or with Jan,
I feel like they're similar skill levels, but Jan got lucky, so he picked up more good wins. Where Gustafsson doesn't have many good wins.
Yeah, Jan got the opportunity to deliver, and Jan got easier opportunities to deliver, and he did.
When we opened this with that, he's like one of the luckiest ever. The reason he's in great and he's like above someone like Alexander Gustafsson, despite not being much better of a fighter in most ways, is that he got very lucky to get some strong wins. Israel Adesanya, yeah. Oh, I remembered who that guy is now. It's Igor Vovchanchyn. I almost said
that's Igor. Okay, I picked a really horrible.
That's Igor Vovchanchyn. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's small, but I did remember who it was. Yeah.
Dang.
So
I love Igor. I'm such a moron.
So Igor, obviously, like one of the crazy
great
careers,
heavyweight,
right? You can put him in solid contender. Around forever, insane win streak. He fought like Ernesto Hoost in kickboxing, which is crazy. He picks up like his first like real in his prime kind of loss to Mark Coleman, who was good fighter. Mark Coleman for a heavyweight wrestler, like super. Sure. And then he starts to lose more. Quinn Jackson, he loses to Crow Cop. And then his career ends, you know, after a casual like 55 wins. It's like super storied career. He beat a lot of kind of what most people would consider no-name Japanese
just nature of pride
fighters. That was just what was around at the time. He's an old school guy. We're gonna put him in here for the old school respect.
Yeah, so old school, we barely remembered him.
I for a second, it literally looked like a picture of like the boxing world heavyweight champion in 1938 or something. Where you're like, he's some like Irish guy named Jack O'Donnelly, and you're like, who's this? Anyways.
But yeah, we'll move on to the One Punch Bro. Jimmy Manuwa, action fighter, yeah.
Yeah, action fighter. I put him with Gary.
Definitely, I'd say definitely over. Yeah, that seems fine. Super strong left hook, solid boxer for light heavyweight. Honestly, like not too bad. Lost to
chin, which is like became a thing. He took a long time to come with the UFC. He has an interesting career path.
Yeah, he was like 37 when he got.
He really wanted to like. He wanted his confidence or whatever it was, or he wanted to build up his resume before he came. But he ended up being a bit old and a bit shop worn by his time. But he picked up some like okay wins.
Got a win over Jan Blachowicz. Yeah.
Yeah, he got a win over Corey Anderson. He knocked him out, right?
Yeah.
So super insanely fun fighter. One of the best fights of all time, in my opinion, with
Thiago
Thiago Santos.
Santos.
An absolutely insane, awesome fight.
Yeah, I mean, I like Jim Meno a lot, weirdly, just because he had like some moments where he looked like a good fighter, and that's kind of hard to find against like at light heavyweight.
Yeah.
Like the OSP knockout is actually like super mean. He like slips the jab into a dig to the body and just cross counters him.
It's awesome. I love that knockout. Yeah, he was definitely a guy who had a boxing technique skill level that is rare for light heavyweight, and that was like his main path to winning, was just like, well, I know how to punch good, and that was kind of it. Yeah, he loses to like Gustafsson pretty bad.
Rumble.
Rumble. Yeah, so not like a guy who ever had a chance of being a contender, really, but definitely a super fun fighter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's kind of weird is if you name the guys he beat, Jan Blachowicz, Corey Anderson, OSP, those are all guys who I think people would consider contenders at one time. He just never got them at the right time, I feel like.
Yeah, and Jan rematches and beats him, right? So, yeah.
It's just, he was solid. He was kind of like a mini Rumble, just didn't really have the same sort of skill set, but just super frightening puncher you didn't want to get close to. But solid. Yuri Prochazka, this is, okay. I am a huge not fan of Yuri Prochazka. I don't want to say a hater because that just makes me look, dumb, because he's tons of fun. But I don't really believe in him as being like really all that great, if that makes sense. Really fun swarmer, weirdly effective anti-grappler, given the Glover Teixeira fight.
Dynamic, a good kicker for light heavyweight. For sure.
Like anything that has to do with offense, he has some idea of how to do it, but defensively, just kind of strategically kind of avoid. I think a lot of people would consider him like a big Tony Ferguson, but Tony Ferguson had like that front kick from way outside.
There's so much more.
And the jab.
Smart things,
it's like Tony Ferguson could draw stuff out and kill you for biting on it. Yuri would just like walk in, let you hit him with the stuff that Tony Ferguson would draw out, and just keep hitting you anyway. But
there is something to be said about a guy who knows what his game is and pushes it insanely hard the whole fight, right? He has really good cardio for a light heavyweight, especially for what he is doing in fights. He has a lot of, at least he's always doing things where he's trying to be dynamic the whole time, and he's not wasting his time doing things that aren't dynamic or are pointless or stuff. He is always doing dynamic things. He has he beat Glover Teixeira. Obviously, Glover in that fight didn't look like a horrible light heavyweight or anything. He was obviously the champion, but he was really old. And, he makes a big mistake at the end, and Jerry gets rocked a bunch in that fight. Obviously, Glover does too, but Jerry gets rocked a bunch. He almost gets finished a bunch. And you don't want to really see a guy go to that type of place. There's not whole lot of argument for him to be lower than like a Gustafsson.
I guess
I feel like he just doesn't have the Israel. Jan's there because he has the Israel Adesanya win, right? Like that's why he's there. None of these other light heavyweights are going to have that. So I would put him around Gustafsson. He's also unlucky because he has this injury, which he had to stop being champion. If he beat someone like Jamal Hill, who's a little bit more process driven, has like athletic qualities, is younger, I would be like, oh wow, this guy can beat not old men. He can beat guys who aren't kind of faded like Reyes and stuff like that. He has room to move up because he isn't like done, I don't think, at light heavyweight at all.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think he's a bad matchup for Jamal Hill, but I also kind of feel like Jamal Hill is a good bit better, which it's funny to say because I feel like Yuri wins that fight a lot, but it's weird. But Krzysztof Jotko, definition of fine, I feel like. Probably
he's fine. I don't really like Krzysztof Jotko. He has pretty boring fights, to be honest.
He likes elbows. That's cool.
Did he actually beat Gerald Meerschaert, or was that a fake?
He actually beat him. Yeah.
He did actually beat him. Yeah, okay. He has lost. He lost to Brendan Allen like really cleanly. He just gets taken out.
I think Ryan mentioned that he actually beat David Branch, but I don't acknowledge David Branch losses, so Branch actually beat him.
It was a split decision, just to be clear. So one judge agreed with Ryan. He got knocked out by. against guys who had some amount of like juice to their game, like a Uriah Hall. He
Yeah,
got knocked out. Even Brad Tavares, who wasn't awesome, but
yeah,
um, he knocked him out, right?
yeah.
So
And I think he beat the
um,
crap out of Hall for a little bit, but par for the course for Uriah Hall.
yeah, that's gonna happen. And then he's able to decision. Uh, well, first off, he only gets like decisions. That's like the thing about him. He can only decision guys. There's a lot of split decisions, and they're bad fights that are horrible to watch, and I don't really care about. So we're moving on. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Martin Kampmann. I mean, I'd say this guy very, very underrated, solid contender for welterweight. In a universe where he's lucky, he gets the opportunities Dan Hardy did. But yeah, really good fighter.
if he has a
Um,
different accent.
Pretty much, yeah. But he has wins over Carlos Condit, Jake Ellenberger. I think he beat a couple pretty solid guys. He beat
Rick
Jake
Story.
Shields. Yeah, Rick Story. He beat Jake Shields and Diego Sanchez, but got robbed by both of them. So that's really what kept him away from a title shot, is those two quote unquote losses. He beat them both super clearly. Like Cameron Sanchez, one of the worst robberies I've ever seen, literally on par with the Pearson decision that everyone hates and brings up. But
Yeah, that one's really bad. It
yeah,
is really, really bad. Yeah.
so
Yeah, he
yeah,
had trouble with big punchers because he didn't have a good chin.
and
And
started
his
super slow.
defense and his slow starter didn't have a good chin. Defense wasn't great.
Yeah.
So he did get knocked out by
Johnny
basically
Hendricks.
when he fought like Paul Daly, Johnny Hendricks. He got it was in the fourth round that he gets finished by Condit, but he does eventually get finished. Obviously, Condit not
Yeah.
like a power guy.
Yeah, and I think
Shorter career, not like really extensive. Almost 30 fights, which isn't nothing, obviously, but a lot of that is in like regional Cage Warriors stuff.
and I think Condit also kind of a situation where I'm pretty sure it was either his second to last or his final fight. I think Hendricks ended the win streak, so it was his last fight. But yeah, like Kampmann beat Condit closer to his own prime and maybe a little bit pre-prime for Condit, but always kind of a fight where they have something competitive and close. And Condit definitely a contender, so I feel like Kampmann was up there. But yeah, just kind of an unlucky fighter.
Yeah, low solid contender.
I'd say probably under Yuri because he didn't win a belt, but
yeah.
Manel Kopp.
I mean, technically, these other guys won belts too, but
yeah, but worse divisions.
Yeah.
Heavyweight.
Also, should mention Oleg Taktarov, not a UFC guy. I don't remember how he ended up here, but he's breaking our rule. But yeah, there you
go. Yeah. So here is Manel
That's right.
Kopp.
I just called him Oleg Taktarov again.
Yeah, it's Igor Vovchanchyn.
I always mix.
I was like, bro, what?
It's dyslexia. Okay, you gotta leave me alone.
I just thought I added Oleg down here somewhere. So I don't remember putting Oleg, but.
Yeah, Manel Kape, fine, I guess.
Yeah, Manel Kape, like he doesn't have the volume to be an action fighter.
Yeah, and he might one day approach a solid contender status if he
beats Perez coming up.
Yeah,
but...
he beat Nicolau in my opinion.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And I think we had Nicolau as fine only though, just
because
flyweight's low level. So yeah, I would say he's I think I actually would put him above the Shore. Yeah, I would put him. Yeah,
maybe because worst division.
Yeah, and because Nicolau isn't like is like a decent fighter and stuff like that. So he's picked up more wins than those two guys did at this point. Kape also, it's a bit fuzzy because he's not really born in Portugal, I don't think, but he does come out to the Portuguese flag, so he was included. And it's like a former Portuguese colony, so it's complicated. But anyways, he's cool in Rizin. He was really cool because the ring made him interesting because his footwork is pretty good, and a lot of the people in Rizin's footwork was bad. So he could maneuver. He would maneuver around them, and then they would start to chase him, and he would mess them up. And then he's an interesting fighter because then he figured out how to do that in the cage. Essentially, it took him like a second. But
I figured it out.
Yeah, Ode Osborne, he basically just is like, oh, I figured out how to do this in an octagon now, and then he did that to him, right? So he's a kind of a fun little weird anachronistic fighter. He's really dynamic for his division. He's a bit of a weirdo.
Yeah, I think Kopp kind of a situation where he wants to be a counterpuncher, but he's much better as a swarmer, which is really annoying.
Like a blitz. Yeah, like a blitzer fighter. And then he has shown to be like a guy who can get a good finish.
Yeah, the O'Day
was
Osborne fight was good. Yeah.
against the cage against I can't remember that fighter's name.
It might be Zhalgas.
Yeah,
Zhalgas
yeah, thanks.
Rugulov.
Yeah, is a really sick finish.
Yeah.
He hits him with some like sick punches. So
7 punch
I
combination.
like Cape, Portugal bias, and yeah, I think he might be a solid contender at some point, but I doubt it a little bit just because he's kind of limited and his style is very specific and only works against specific, approaches.
I mean, I think as of now, he probably beats Perez just because Perez might be a little bit washed, and he's generally the kind of fighter who gets dynamismed a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm not super sure about it. But yeah, I think
and flyweight's weak. Like if I know Nicolas like a a high ranked guy, but I don't really want to say that he's a solid contender fighter either. So, but if he was able to be like the third ranked flyweight
I'd
at
say,
some point, then I would say that's a solid contender. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, we can move on. Nikita Krylov,
Action
fighter for sure.
Yeah.
I'd say probably above Manuel at this point. He has a couple better wins.
Yeah, he's weird. He kind of sometimes wants to grapple, but he can't really grapple. His striking is like really strange, and it's very light heavyweight where you're always like throwing from really far away and you're charging in, and it's all power strikes all the time until you're tired. I really don't like
Gustafsson,
it.
But really, 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 really bad Gustafsson.
I really don't like it. Someone should teach light heavyweights how people their size should fight.
Yeah, we need more Jimmy Manuels.
Yeah, more Jimmy Manuels. Even more like Jan is like the good version of is like the better version of the charging in and throwing from far away thing. At least like be Jan Blachowicz. At least do some of the good stuff. Not really a good grappler when you get submitted by Jan Blachowicz. It's tough to say you can. Yeah. So, but he's definitely action packed. Definitely a guy who has a lot of crazy fights. Okay.
Yeah. Leon Edwards, I think pretty obviously all the way up here. At least I guess there's
so
someone
this was a recent discussion on Twitter, which was if Leon beats Usman, will he pass him? Will he pass Bisping for the greatest?
He already did. Yeah.
And I think he already did. Rafael dos Anjos and Kamaru Usman are two outstandingly great wins. They are better than any wins Michael Bisping has. And also he is just a higher skill fighter in a higher division who became champ through less, unlikely means. Yeah.
The win really itself seemed unlikely, but getting there, he's
really unlucky fighter in his career, missing out on like Tyron Woodley layup main events in London because of COVID.
Missed out on Chimaev too, and I think he would have won that fight. I mean,
Chimaev
that's not really unlucky, but he did get kind of unlucky because when he didn't, like when Chimaev pulled out a couple times, Leon got pulled from the rankings.
Yeah, the Bilal Muhammad eye poke, which was just kind of a really unfortunate accident. Eye pokes happen all the time, and they don't end fights. So, although the eye poke was his fault, it's unlucky that it caused that amount of damage, right?
Yeah.
And he was owning Bilal Muhammad, so I think
that's like a third top 5 tier win, which I guess
if you don't want to count it a win, you can at least say it's exemplary of his skill level to completely wash a Bilal Muhammad for as long as that fight lasted.
I think even if he loses to Usman,
he's the highest skilled British fighter of all time. He's probably the highest skilled non-Russian European fighter of all time.
I think
unless I'm forgetting something.
Well, I guess McGregor's coming up, and that's the one.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry. I was forgetting.
I'm honest. I can see that one either way, if I'm being honest.
Well, we're definitely not putting McGregor, but Anyways, Leon, me and Serum love.
Leon.
We love him. We've loved him a long, long time. We've always believed in him. He's definitely one of our like boys. We have a lot in the, a lot of money invested, fictional. Metaphorical money invested in Leon Edwards.
We have the Leon Edwards stock. We bought all of it.
We're
owners of the Leon Edwards stock.
We own the whole. We own the whole company. Leon Edwards is really, really great. And
super. Yeah, good.
Yeah, we should mention like Kamaru Usman is one of the best. Like his win, knocking that fighter out. That is one of the best wins in like the last 5 years of MMA.
For sure.
Champions who are that dominant, who are that, broadly skilled. It's not like Usman has like a way where you just do that and you can beat him.
And it's the kind of thing where it being a comeback, like there's sort of a balance to be struck with good wins, I guess, where like if you beat them too well, it looks like they're bones. And if you let them do too much, it looks like a really horrible comeback where he just looked worse. And Leon definitely leaned on the latter side of that. But like it was a competitive fight for a lot of minutes, and I think people sort of forget that. But like the first round, not all Leon.
He wins the first round.
Yeah.
And then the second round is closer than people remember.
Yeah, until like the last 40 seconds, it was pretty much a toss-up. And that was with Usman getting a couple free shots off that foot stuck in cage thing.
Yeah. So he wasn't as like behind on the cards as people might think. Just because he was very close to winning the second round. And then he would have won the fifth, obviously. So it's always interesting when they go like, well, if it went to decision, well, it's like, does he get a 10-8 for head kicking him? Well, like, how do you count this type of thing?
It's a 3-2.
Is it a draw? What happened, right? So, sorry, to go back to it, it's one of the best wins of the last 5 years in MMA. It's like it's insanely rare for any fighter to have a win that good at any point in their career. Even really great fighters, like there's fighters who are, top 25 all time who don't have a win as good as knocking out Kamaru Usman. So Kamaru Usman is a top 25 all-time fighter. So it's you really can't discount that. Like that is just he could have like almost no other fights other than that, and he would be in the same exact spot just because that win is so good. You cannot underrate Kamaru Usman. He is an amazing dominant champion with a ton of wins. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think beating both RDA and Usman, that's crazy for welterweight. Like those are two of the highest skilled welterweights we've ever seen.
Yeah, to like people who think like Tyron Woodley is a greater all-time welterweight than Leon Edwards because he defended it. It's like Tyron Woodley doesn't have 2 wins that good. I don't think Wonder Boy and Damian Maia are as good as RDA and the Kamaru Usman head kick win.
Yeah.
Like those 2 wins are like really great.
And it's also a situation where both of those are kind of tricky style matchups for Leon, right? Like if you told me Leon would be fighting a pressury southpaw who was really, really good in the clinch, I'd be like, dang, Leon's in trouble. And Leon, like that wasn't an easy fight for Leon, the RDA fight, but like it wasn't tenuous. It wasn't a questionable win. It was Leon controlling a lot of the fight and RDA having maybe a burst of success here and there. So like really, really phenomenal. Like the thing with Leon is people tend to kind of underrate him just because a lot of his wins, like the other guy gets to look good. And that's sort of the situation with the skill set, right? He's a guy who really thrives on guys coming at him where he can do his counters and he can do his clinch. And if you let him cook, he's just going to body kick you twice around and be done with it. But at that situation, you do get a lot of wins where guys get to look really good and Leon proves that he can beat them. And that's the situation you don't get often, even with all-time greats, right? Like you look at a bunch of the wins of like GSP and those guys just look like bums. And Leon's not at GSP level, obviously, in terms of greatness. He just hasn't had the length of career yet. But Leon gets wins where guys look like the best fighters in the world and he beats them anyway, which is really cool.
Yeah, there was a friend of the fight site who mentioned, I think it was today, actually, when we recorded this, Leon is just not a fighter built to blow other fighters out. We've obviously seen this in like a notorious example that shall not be named. But
Donald Cerrone, yes.
Yes, Donald Cerrone, the Donald Cerrone fight. That fight actually isn't close at all. I kind of do think that fight is a blowout, actually.
It's like a 4-1, but Cerrone runs forward a lot.
It's actually not that close. He gets his ass kicked. Cerrone. It's just kind of a slow paced ass kicking. And then the 5th round, Leon he takes his foot off the gas. Yeah. But it's not like Cowboy's like, oh no, he's gonna finish him. Anyways. So Leon Edwards, he's a weird fighter in a lot of ways. He has weird fights in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He has a weird, the way he talks about fighting and thinks about fighting when you listen to him is kind of strange for an MMA fighter. His like cerebral quality that he brings to it, which is a little bit like a 150 IQ brain genius thing where you're overthinking stuff sometimes, but sometimes it's like really brilliant thinking. Like he comes into a fight with some really great ideas for how to deal with an opponent. I'd love to see him as a coach one day. I think it'd be really interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
I think
lovely on Edwards.
I think that's what's funny is like if you look at like the RDA fight, it really reminds you of like the dynamic of like a Muay Thai fight, and you've never seen that ever in any other fight, where
Yes.
Leon's like backing up to the fence and he's just really comfortable with the idea of RDA stepping in to turn him through the clinch, and I don't think I've ever seen that in another fight, which is
Yeah, it's
so
a very,
odd.
very unique. It's a very,
Yeah,
very unique fight. He's a very unique fighter in general.
yeah,
And underrated, I think, especially as a grappler. We should say that
100%.
there's kind of an idea, which is that he has looked like a susceptible striking sometimes because of the way he vibes and stuff. And I think it's underrated how much against less well-rounded fighters he would just grapple them.
Yeah.
He would just grapple them super easily. He is a very good grappler.
Yeah, like there was a lot of talk of like Leon ducking Wonderboy around like right before his title shot.
He would have just taken him down a bunch.
Yeah, I think Leon would have outstruck him too. Honestly, it would have just been slow, and people would have gotten really mad. But he would, he would have just taken him down.
Yeah, he's a very good grappler. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah. But we'll move on to Lerone Murphy. This is a prospect that both of us really like. I'd say as of now he's in action fighter territory, but he has some real potential.
Yeah, he's way older than you want him to be for a prospect.
And he got shot in the face once. But...
Yeah, he's in his, I think he's 30 now, maybe 31. And he has been really just a super unfortunate career with canceled fights against Charles Jourdain twice, I think he might have been canceled. He was not able to get fights in the top 15, even though he should have.
And he got the recent Nathaniel Wood, well, I guess the future Nathaniel Wood fight canceled.
Yeah, he got the Nathaniel Wood fight canceled. He got jawburied by Tukugov. Yeah. And sorry, if people don't know what that means, he won, but it was a draw. So you got robbed, but you didn't get robbed into a loss. You get robbed into a draw. That's what that means.
Look at Figueiredo Moreno one for that.
Yeah, but I like him. He's super dynamic as an athlete. His style makes a ton of sense where he's just, counter punching. He can kick. He has a very well-rounded game where he's really just looking to set up, a few good pieces of offense for 15 minutes and see if he can win the fight that way, basically.
Yeah, I remember the Tukugov fight. He really impressed me because he's not a great wrestler. The Amirkhani fight kind of actually a tricky look because Amir Khani just sort of blows out for a round, and it's hard to resist that.
You always kind of look like a worse grappler than you are against Amirkhani, because if someone is trying with all their might to take you down and they don't care about how tired they will be, you can do it when you do that as a fighter. It's like such a bad idea.
Not worth
Why
it.
Would you ever? Yeah.
But I mean, Murphy, he's clever. I remember liking a lot of his jabbing and boxing looks against Tukugov, and against Amirkhani, he just came out in round 2 and walked him into a knee. So that's cool. But I think he has a lot of promise. Pretty good athlete. I think he was in 100-degree heat that he ended up outlasting Tukugov on short notice or something. So that's super cool. But really good fighter.
He is 31, but he has no miles. It's 12 fights basically in his career. So hopefully he can, action fighter. So hopefully he can continue to improve. He has, he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He has 5 canceled bouts in the last 3 years, which is more than he's had actual fights. But in his fights, he's looked good. Against Douglas Da Silva de Andrade, he looked really good.
That's a very good
as
win
a boxer,
too.
right? So, and I think he would have beaten all the guys he was matched up against. So it's double unfortunate. It's like Nate Landwehr, Nathaniel Wood, Jourdain.
Yeah,
those are decent matchups for him, just because those guys aren't defensive fighters really. And he has the power advantage.
Yeah.
We can move on to we literally just talked about him. Yeah, Amirkhani is fine.
I think he sort of fights like he's supposed to be an action fighter. I think I'd put him somewhere here, just because he either wants to die or he wants to front choke you in 30 seconds.
He's more handsome than he is good at fighting. He's from SBG. He's super SBG fighter where nothing makes sense. There's such a severe lack of intent to the skill set. where he just tries to run at people. He has a lot of bad losses now
Yeah.
at this point. And his wins are not like good fighters.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a
honestly,
lot of like fellow European fighters he's beaten who can't grapple.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly,
I
one of
actually
the
feel
funny
like I
things.
think all his wins are against other Europeans. It feels like, except
Yeah,
maybe
I
like
think he beat like
Jason
Chris
Knight.
Fishgold and Jason
Yeah.
Knight. But yeah, honestly, one of the funny things about him is that people getting really excited about another guy from a Nordic country who either front chokes you in a round or gasses is Khamzat Chimaev. So that's a comparison I've drawn that makes people really mad. But yeah, with Mangwan, he's
Chimaev's better than
well, yeah, but
Amirkhani, but
it's a fun short stop.
but they do there's a little bit of that.
But yeah, I mean, Amir Khan is actually part of one of my favorite beatdowns of all time. But on the losing end, the Shane Burgos fight is just so nasty. It's disgusting.
That's
but
great.
It makes me so happy to see because like Amir Khan wins one round and then Burgos just takes it back in blood. But yeah, it's so much fun. But yeah, Amir Khan is just built for violent losses or really clean, slick
just because
wins.
he gasses out so bad, trying so hard. That,
he has like 30 seconds of gas.
And the thing is, featherweight is like a cardio division. There's like random action fighters who have some of the best cardio in the whole UFC that are at featherweight. Like Charles Jourdain is like one of the most unstoppable monsters ever, and he's just like the 32nd best featherweight in the world. So it's like it's so hard to be a guy with no cardio at featherweight.
Yeah, he fights like the thing I will say is he optimizes for the fact that he can't go 3 rounds at a normal pace by just blowing out in the first round and trusting that like he'll either get a choke or he'll die in flames. But it's like that is the way you kind of have to do it in that sort of division. But yeah, we can move on. This is an interesting one. I think obviously top 2. But
so I would say he's the top one. I would that's what I would put.
I guess that's what's tricky, right? Because if you say great in terms of resume, I think he's definitely better than Leon Edwards for now. If you say great in terms of goodness, I feel like he's a little bit more limited, but it hasn't mattered.
So people have come around a little bit more to the idea that Conor McGregor got, a favorable path through his career, I think.
Yeah.
The idea that his featherweight run didn't require, the hardest matchups. He fought Dustin Poirier before Dustin Poirier had figured out how to be durable, which is a big part of him being good. He fights Chad Mendes on really short notice, where Chad Mendes is really, really competitive with him. But it kind of looks like both guys have a really nice path to winning that fight. We just don't get to see it fully like fleshed out with a full camp. And then he has one of the greatest wins of all time against Jose Aldo. And you say, well, Leon Edwards has one of the great wins of all time. But
he doesn't have 2 of them, which with Eddie Alvarez.
Yeah, but that's the thing is then Eddie Alvarez. But I think the idea that the Nate Diaz loss was not, some kind of momentary lapse in judgment, right?
Yeah.
The Dustin Poirier fights have shown how his boxing isn't infallible. He's not just clear one of the best strikers in MMA. He has striking flaws beyond his gas tank, right? Because he doesn't gas out in the Dustin Poirier fights. He gets beat by getting tagged and getting hit with a trite of damage and, countered. And so.
Yeah, and Nate Diaz too, way too competitive to really say that like Diaz 1 was just him getting randomly cardio poisoned. Like that, it's just a fight that's hard for him. Yeah. Which it's funny because both of our top 2 guys are.
Yeah, the Khabib fight. I think he gets too much credit for that. This might be a controversial opinion. He doesn't come in with like a winning strategy, to me. And Khabib looks really good against Conor's pressure, and Conor strikes with him for a whole round and isn't really able to pick away at Khabib's like a really weird defense, right? Yeah. He never is able to really lead him into a strong, counter or anything. Even in that whole round, he gets a lot of time to do it. Because Khabib is really fast and does some smart things. So yeah, I think people are more okay with the idea that Conor is a very, very, very flawed all-time great, more than they were before. But he still has too many great wins and is an all-time great. So yeah, I think he would still be considered. To me, he's the best European to ever fight, not counting Russians.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's that if we split this up into great but lucky and great but unlucky, I think we have the top two in different tiers. But with McGregor, it's kind of interesting because just like the way he's built is sort of, it's the opposite of Leon, right? Like in a Conor McGregor win, the guy he's beating just looks awful and doesn't get anything going whatsoever, so it's kind of hard to gauge. Like I think he's kind of a tricky fight for Aldo at any time, but the way that
Yeah,
fight
I
went,
agree. Yeah.
it's really hard to value the Aldo win as being anything but like he high rolled it so insanely hard that it's like it almost doesn't count as much as you'd want it to. And then
Yeah,
how his
you
career
should
went on.
mention probably like he has some amount of like stylistic regression between featherweight and lightweight. Also, you should mention that he only has one win that's good, really, above or one win that's great above featherweight in his
Right.
whole career. I think the second Nate fight is good because Nate Diaz was good when he was actually a full-time fighter. He was a fine
And a tricky
lightweight.
matchup for Connor, just
Yeah, and
a real attrition line.
he was a fine lightweight. He was like top 8 or whatever. So it's a good one. But yeah, it's only one great win above lightweight, and then a bunch of losses. So really, his featherweight career is his main career, and he's a very different fighter at featherweight in a lot of ways, in terms of how kick oriented he was. A really good kicker.
Yeah.
At featherweight, really hard kicker. Very
and
good
had good
placement.
ideas around it too. Just
Yeah,
classic
very
southpaw
good
double attack
placement
stuff with the front kick.
against. Very good placement on like body kicks. He knew how to like move guys around with a head kick, right? Even if you're just kicking their guard, really just keeping them off their feet, unable to plant and obviously the snap kicks to the body against Chad Mendes worked really, really well. They were a really, really smart decision for the fight, and did a ton of damage. So he had a lot of very good techniques at featherweight that paired with how huge of a puncher he was at that division,
and how huge of a fighter in general.
Yeah, and how he had this combination of size and speed at the division, where he was as fast as the fastest featherweights and bigger than the biggest featherweights. That was just so nasty, and he was very, very good striker, and he had some ideas for what to do when things got to the ground or when people would try to grapple him, framing. He didn't have a horrible bottom game or anything. But he loses a lot of that when he moves up to lightweight. He becomes a bit more boxing heavy. He does a lot of of these bad spin kicks that I don't know if he's ever landed one.
Yeah, he usually I think the meme with Connor is that like a lot of people just rip off the Dan Hardy or some analysis that his kicks are just a smoke screen for his hands. I was like, oh, anytime he takes a spin kick, it's like it's a smoke screen. It sometimes is. Like the round kick hides the left hand a lot, but the spin kicks, they just never really connected into his game. They're just something he wanted to do.
They're actually just a way for guys to get out of his pressure on the cage. Because they just circle the other way, they can finally not feel so feel so much pressure. So Connor was a very, very good fighter in his prime. Super dangerous, an all-time great with some great wins, but really flawed, and someone who didn't always know what he didn't always have a focus in fights. I don't think he was like a tremendously smart fighter. I think because of the way he talked,
people thought he was a lot smarter.
Yeah, people thought he was a lot smarter than he was. He really has some bad approaches in a lot of his fights, and some good approaches too. But that's that's more baseline for an MMA fighter. That's baseline for an MMA fighter. That doesn't make you smart. Or above average smart.
I think my position on Connor tends to be that if we're comparing him to Leon, I think a universe in which we have Jan Blachowicz in the gray tier is pretty much fine to have Leon above Connor just based on the eye test. But it's also kind of tricky because Connor is the exact opposite of Leon in terms of when we talked about Leon, it was he's not built to take over fights. Connor, he's entirely built to take over fights. And the second he has a hard fight, it looks a lot messier, which it's a lot harder to gauge, right? And Connor having so much better of a resume as of this point, it does make it tricky to bias Leon over him, which I would be fine with, but I'm also cool with this. It's odd because if you put Connor against a bunch of matchups at current lightweight. I feel like he doesn't do as well as people want him to. Just because, the weakness against fellow southpaws, against guys who can really kick him with any sort of system around it. I mean, really, with like being put on the back foot for any extended amount of time with the cardio, like the limited window he has over 7 minutes, he's just kind of a fighter who.
Or being under great grapplers, just because
Yeah.
he was never like a, he initially had the UK or the European grappler tag, right?
Yeah.
Of like, oh, you can't do it at all, and that wasn't true, but it also wasn't true that he
was like
is
a super functional
above
bottom player.
average. Yeah.
I mean, I think it just sort of speaks to the way that we looked at the Euro guys. It's like if you look at the Brazilian tier list, there are like 6, 7 guys who are just unassailably great, who are like, in terms of like if you look at them fight, they looked like fantastic fighters anywhere they went. And I think Conor's kind of a weird inversion of that, where he's sort of this hyper specialized. I wouldn't necessarily say super lucky, but certainly someone who's avoided a lot of the trouble that comes with all-time great careers in a lot of situations.
Yeah, he just didn't stick around a lot to like lose to other fighters.
Exactly, and I think
and then he came back and now has like the excuse of like, well, he's not that serious. I don't really buy that.
Exactly.
When Dustin Poirier gets on top of you and he top games you, I'm just gonna think,
you're
just not better than Dustin. Like, if this was a tier list of every MMA fighter ever, I wouldn't put him higher than Dustin Poirier. I think Dustin Poirier, even though he doesn't have that Jose Aldo win, but he has a Max Holloway win. He has a Justin Gaethje win.
He has pretty much the same Eddie Alvarez win.
Yeah. He has the Eddie Alvarez win. He has Michael Chandler wins. He has like all these Anthony Pettis, right? Yeah. He has all these great wins, and then he beat Conor McGregor in a way that I think is like really replicable and would have happened in Conor's whatever you imagine his super prime whatever as.
Exactly.
So yeah, Conor, I think pretty flawed, but such a great A game. And such a potent skill set to mix with it, and athleticism to mix with it. And he picked up the right wins at the right time to be an all-time great. So that's where he'll be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd have these two guys pretty much on equal ground, but it's fine with either order. We're on to, I believe this is Melvin Manoff. This is one guy I couldn't find a portrait of, so it's kind of hard to tell, but that's Melvin Manoff.
Yeah, yes, it is Melvin Manoff.
Definite action fighter, I'd say. Just one of the most freakishly hard hitters I've ever seen in my life.
Yep. He's definitely an all-time, power puncher for MMA list if you make one. I feel like around Jimmy Manuwa is probably.
Yeah, they're not.
He couldn't really grapple. He wasn't really like a great defensive fighter at all.
He wasn't very durable, and that's a big problem.
No, wasn't very durable. He wasn't great at dealing with kicks. He has a Robbie Lawler fight where he kicks up Robbie Lawler's legs, but
and then Lawler comes back. That was crazy.
He doesn't have many good wins. He has a lot of he has a whole extensive kickboxing career, and he has like obviously probably the most famous moment of his career is knocking out Mark Hunt.
Yeah, that one's wild.
So it's like it's all-time chin versus an all-time power puncher, and the power puncher wins. It's a good it's a good science experiment.
Yeah, it's like what Pride did with Fujita, but with a good fighter.
He's like actually I'd probably put him lower. He just wasn't like super.
He wasn't great, but
I looking through his wins, I just don't. There's not really any.
I'd say above Amirkhani. Yeah, I'd say probably above Duffy, but I'm not sure. But super fun.
I was scrolling through his topology and I saw his loss to Brock Larson, and I briefly read it as Brock Lesnar, and I was like, "What the hell?" I was like, I thought I teleported to another dimension where that happened.
We're on to Merab. I hate him so much, but there's really no argument for him being.
Yeah, he's a solid contender. Yeah. He beat Peter Yan. Peter Yan's a really, really good fighter.
Yeah, I guess he has to be here, actually.
He beat Peter Yan. Peter Yan's a really, really good fighter. Sarah Longo continues to be surprisingly smart for seeming like a meathead. Jim, he's gotten a lot better as a striker, like way better.
Like Merab is smart at being a meathead is, I think, the trick.
Yeah. He has some of the most ridiculous physical attributes you'll ever see.
For sure.
You can rock him, but he'll recover freakishly fast, like you see against Marlon Moraes. He has some of the greatest cardio MMA's ever seen.
Yeah, that Jan performance is just
for a style that doesn't conserve energy well at all. He still has endless energy,
yeah.
and he knows what he does, especially in that Jan fight. He does a lot of things that make sense and work for his game, and that's a really dominant win. He wins.
It is.
He wins all 5 rounds, I think,
Like
or
50,
maybe
40%
4-1.
for life.
So yeah, and bantamweight's super strong, and he might be a bantamweight champion one day if Sterling leaves. Like I could see him beating a Chito Vera. I could see him beating Corey Sandhagen.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty likely. Unfortunately, I think it's less that he's like tons.
And when you're a bantamweight champion, that means you're awesome. That means you're like all time, really really good.
Skilled. Yeah.
You're like super great if you're a bantamweight champion. I don't think he does great against the old bantamweight champions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of
the Cruises.
Yeah, I think for the most
part. But obviously
part,
he beat Peter Yan, and I feel like actually he would do perfectly fine against Henry Cejudo. They would have the most like freak fight you've ever seen. But Cejudo's smaller, not actually a guy who's like built to stuff takedowns all the time. So he would probably keep Cejudo really, really busy, and they would have like a barn burner.
Yeah, I think Merab is he's even more than just being tons better than someone like Chito Vera or Corey Sandhagen. He's just a really horrible matchup for those guys to deal with. You've got these guys who aren't great at not having will imposed upon them for at least a certain bit of the fight, and this is this guy who's just he both has the athletic attributes and the brain to just keep opposing his will 100% of the time. I do think that, if you look at in the past, I think guys like Dillashaw, Cruz, probably Rafael Assunção.
I think Sterling too is actually bad.
Sterling might be tricky.
Because I think Sterling could actually grapple
Merab. I think Sterling's weird just because there's so much of a tank difference.
Yeah, I have this feeling that Sterling, maybe surprisingly, against a guy who's like a jitterbug on the ground, that's kind of Sterling's thing is scrambly guys. He just says, well, no, I'm just gonna control you. You're not gonna get me off of you. And then
he does before me got flyweights, and it doesn't
matter. And I just so I could see him troubling Merab pretty badly that way. I actually I don't think Chito has no chance, and actually Sandhagen too, because unlike Jan, those guys have intercepting tools that they bring out often, and early. But it is hard because he's such a demon, Merab, in fights, right? He's such a demon, and those guys don't have kind of like the activity. But I think one of the two, you could roll the dice a few times and they would actually win.
I mean, I
don't think it's impossible. But anyways, he's a really high level fighter. He's more of a game that makes sense and works, meat and potatoes tools, and then amazing traits than he is like a smart fighter or like a really deeply skilled fighter. But that doesn't change the fact that what he's able to do in the cage works. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like I like Arlen Allen's game more, but I'd also trust Allen to lose a lot more against guys with someone like Merab's game, which it's a shame, but we're on to Gegard Mousasi, who I feel like solid contender at his best.
Yeah, solid contender at his best, but one of the more overrated fighters.
Yeah, I put him somewhere around here, I think.
In terms of MMA nerd lore.
I don't think he was ever the best middleweight. I don't think he was probably ever like the second.
No, I don't even think he was ever the second best at all. Yeah. I don't even know if he was the third or fourth, to be honest.
I mean, he got completely crushed by Jacare, which like the top tier guys don't tend to have.
Yeah, we mentioned in the Brazilian tier list that Lyoto Machida stunted on him super hard. He has like wins that are fine. Vitor Belfort kind of passed it. Chris Weidman about to be past it, but you don't want to totally discount it. It's a weird win, obviously, because of the grounded knee controversy, confusion.
I mean, I also think like in a lot of situations, like with Bisping on top, and as much as I love Bisping, a lot of guys were more solid contenders than they would have been at other times. Just because like you give Gegard a shot, and I think Bisping would have been fine, but it's still a fight where it's competitive and close, and Gegard has a shot at it. So
Yeah. He has his kind of like Strikeforce dream days. He loses to Muhammad Lawal, which is like not a great way to
yeah,
lose. And then I give a lot more credit to Uriah Hall for winning that fight than most people. The problem with Uriah Hall in that fight is that he can't stop getting put in submissions, even though he keeps doing a good job of like surviving the scenario. It just piles up too much, and then he in the rematch he gets submitted. That's kind of Uriah Hall's problem. He doesn't know how to avoid the opponent's thing, so he's constantly having to deal with it, and he
he just
never
kind of
gets
has
to
to
do.
vibe and randomly
Yeah,
get
and he
shot.
never gets to do his thing. But in the first fight, he's stuffing takedowns. He's not like losing the striking badly at all in that fight. And then he times Gegard maybe shooting, maybe how
I
on
think he was just
purpose that
dipping.
spinning
Yeah,
back kick was, and he hits him. But then the way he finishes it is amazing.
yeah.
Flying knee to punches is like a crazy, dynamic, high performance finish. Anyways, I'm talking about this guy's losses. Yeah, but he was a good fighter. He was like skilled for middleweight, well rounded, but he vibed a lot actually. Musasi, and he
Yeah.
never was able to dominate guys if they had like a real specialty. Machida in striking, Jacare on the ground. And then
And I
his
think
like
it's
post
also
UFC career isn't very good. He
yeah.
doesn't really have like good wins.
Yeah, and he had the loss to Johnny Eblen, who I mean, I feel like people think
Yeah,
Johnny Eblen's
and
really good,
Rafael
but
Lovato Jr. too.
yeah,
He is still grappleable, right? Which is
yeah,
like the thing, even against a really old man.
yeah. And I mean, I think the thing is that people look at someone with a really pared down game like Musasi had, and they're like, well, immediately he has to be like super deep for it to work. But I feel
Yeah.
like anytime he fought someone who was like a southpaw, all of his tools went out the window immediately. The jab and the inside leg kick, he just didn't know any, like he just didn't have any great ideas. The exception being, of course, elderly Vitor Belfort, but like it's old Vitor Belfort. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
But
He had canceled bouts against Brunson and Bisping. I think he probably makes, he just was too put together to lose to someone like Brunson. But I feel like Bisping at that point, 2016,
yeah, Bisping could have done it.
he could have done it. Yeah,
Like
he
I
would
think
have been. I
Bisping
think
is
fine.
just kind of like a really urgent version of Musasi who thinks a lot more. So
Yeah, and is a bit more committed and kind of like tough and all
yeah,
that.
he's not the skill bully. Musasi is the skill bully version of Bisping.
Yeah.
But
The prospect, Nathaniel Wood.
yeah,
He's a good
Daniel
fighter.
Wood. Yeah, I mean, I'd say he's had kind of an action fightery career, but I feel like he has a lot of real upside up here, especially at featherweight.
Yeah, you kind of want to. You don't want to overrate,
Yeah,
just because young guys can have ups and downs, where they look great one time, they look bad the next. Um,
yeah, I'd say
but
about here
he
for
has
now.
room to
But
move. Yeah, he has room to move. And he does a lot of neat things. And I don't know what camp he's with, but they
I
give
feel like
him
he's in Pickett's camp, isn't he?
maybe, yeah. They give him some interesting things to do that other guys don't do. His like clinch work,
The way he
his
connects the
boxing,
front kicks to his punches.
yeah, his boxing game. Yeah, it's an interesting. We'll see how he works out at featherweight. He hasn't fought any big featherweights yet, since moving up from bantamweight.
Yeah. But
Um,
the Jourdain fight, absolute banger.
yeah,
The fight with Casey Kenny, one of the secretly best fights of that year. Um, yeah, super fun fighter.
yeah, we'll see. He's still pretty. No, he's not that young, but he's not. He's not. He's not like too crazy deep into his career or anything. And the Charles Jourdain win is a good win. Charles Russell is only fine. Yeah, he had those rough kind of losses with Casey Kenny and John Dodson, where he didn't look like he had enough process or kind of idea of what he should be doing.
Yeah.
So he got worked by guys with simple things they can do. But yeah, we'll see where he goes. He's an action fighter right now. He might end up a contender. I doubt it a little bit, just because he's not an awesome athlete or anything. But
yeah, and I think he's got kind of big defensive flaws, given the Dodson fight, where with that he was just like, I remember at one point against Dodson, he got like 1996 Vitor Belfort all across the cage, like across the whole thing, which is the kind of thing I never want to see from someone who's that good. But yeah, Brad Pickett. So I'd say, I mean, he has the Demetrius Johnson win. He was really fun. I'm not sure I'd put him up in solid contender just for the DJ win, but like he was good. I liked him a lot. WEC legend, lower weight class pioneer.
Yeah, it's really his WEC things
Yeah.
are what gets him on this, but he does have a UFC career.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was fun. He was a little bit of a low down on solid contender. I think
Yeah.
he's fine. I think maybe you could say just an action fighter. I don't know.
I think for flyweight, like flyweight's never been crazy deep, and he had some good wins there. I mean, beating DJ by itself, like I know I said I didn't want to do it just because of that, but like he wasn't nothing outside of that, I guess, and that's a really nice win to have in retrospect, just as like the capstone of your career.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a good performance against Chito Vera at the very end of his career, which like as Ryan says, he would have won if he kept wrestling, but then he just got head kicked. But
oh yeah, that's such an unfortunate. Yeah, I like him though. He's got that kind of classic flyweight striker thing where it's a lot of long punch combinations, really quick. It looks like a Dragon Ball Z fight where it's just a cloud of punches in front of him.
Yeah, for someone named One Punch, I think he has like one punch knockout in his entire career. It was that uppercut he hit on Yves Chauvelin. That was fun. I like that knockout a lot. But, Alexander Rakic, definition of fine. I hate him so much.
Yeah, he's just fine. He's like super just vibes. He's
the Christoph Jotko of light heavyweight.
Yeah, he's dynamic. Jotko isn't dynamic, but he wants to stand super far away and run at you, throw strikes from too far away, not really know how to grapple. He's the classic like Krylov thing.
Right.
Of these light heavyweights just don't know how to fight with their big jacked athlete bodies. They're like, I'm so tall and I've got so much muscles, I can stand so far away, and then they don't do anything, or they miss constantly, or they run at each other. It's so bad. I hate light heavyweights who fight like that so much. Anyways, we can move on.
I guess people might get a little bit sad about this, just because we have Jimmy Manuwa a whole tier above him, but like Manuwa is.
Well, it's not a tier. It's just that one's action packed and the other isn't.
Yeah. And also, Manuwa at his best was probably a little bit better.
Yeah, probably.
Alistair Overeem, I'd definitely say great for him.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I would put him right with Bisping. Maybe. Yeah. Is he above Bisping, you think?
I'm not sure, because he didn't win the belt, but his career's been, I'd say, worst division, though. Like, I think...
Yeah, I think, behind Bisping. Let me...
If Overeem got a win, I mean, that's the thing, is Overeem has a bunch of, like, really nice wins. He has the win over Verdum in the series. He has Mark Hunt a couple times, but I feel like nothing really hitting close to prime Silva or prime Luke Rockhold. Like, those are some really crazy wins. And Bisping, like... His career has also been stupid long. That's not even a real advantage Reem has at that point.
I love if we could include his kickboxing career. We can't.
At that point,
he beat like Peter Eriks and stuff. So you're like, wow, this is awesome.
Yeah, if we put his kickboxing career in, he'd be above Bisping. But...
Yeah. But we don't. So, but yeah, he's obviously like an insanely long career. He kind of always had the same problems his whole career, like a lot of light heavyweights. But he kept on winning for a really long time. And he never really lost to people who were bad ever.
And I mean, I think the thing with Overeem is that he's kind of the exact opposite of Cyril Gane in terms of being like a long, kicky guy, in that he kept changing. He's one of the few fighters who have like 4 or 5 distinct stages of his career. And he just reinvented himself every time. He is Wolverine. That is who he is.
It's too bad we missed out on him in the Strikeforce heavyweight tournament, because that was like a real opportunity to pick up good wins, right?
Yeah, and I think Overeem at his best, he's competitive with pretty much every heavyweight of all time if he doesn't just get killed.
Yeah, he was obviously competitive with Stipe. He dropped him, right?
Yeah,
they had a good fight.
He's super versatile too.
Yeah, really like great for a heavyweight. Like surprisingly really great. I do think he's better than Cro Cop.
Yeah, like skill-wise, I think it's really hard. Like, that's the thing is, Overeem's kind of overrated as a striker at distance, but he's also super underrated as a striker in the clinch. Like, in terms of pound-for-pound clinchers, Overeem is like right up there at his best. It's just that at distance he was kind of janky and didn't really have great boxing. But like as a system to get to his clinch, it was actually pretty effective. And he's just kind of trying things. Like he's a heavyweight who had a lot of good ideas. and they didn't always work, but they didn't always fail, and he knew how to do stuff in several areas. As I said, the opposite of Cyril Gahn, right? Someone who never sat on his laurels and could do stuff at any point in the fight where you wanted him to be.
Yeah. You can also imagine the older version of him that was obviously like chinny, couldn't strike as much anymore, against some of his early losses and say like, well, you just would have grappled him if it was 34-year-old Overeem or whatever. You just would have taken down Bigfoot Silva and smashed him with elbows instead of getting knocked out.
Right.
So the interesting thing about it is that he changes in a way that, some of his losses I don't even care that much about because I feel like his skill levels surpassed them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Danny Roberts, action fighter.
Yep, action fighter.
Above.
I'd put him above Amir Khani.
Yeah.
I guess I don't. Yeah, I'd put him above Amir Khani. Yeah. He's just a British striker. He's fine.
Had a fun fight with Mike Perry. Got his ass kicked by Trinaldo. We love him for that last one.
Yeah, we do.
The last great Trinaldo performance. I'm so sad. But,
yeah. Just he fought a lot of those like British guys on British cards who weren't great wins or anything, and they were fun fights. He's like Taleb and Camp Zawada, like it's a lot of that, right? It's a lot of like, oh, this was a British card where he fought another, or this was a European card and he fought another European guy, and there was a striker matchup where they didn't look too great, but it was fun and whatever. Yeah. Ross Pearson.
I'd say, at his best, I think he was definitely a solid contender, right? Like maybe low tier, but he was solid.
I was kind of thinking high in the action fighter tier, but I don't know. Do you have an argument for why he?
Yeah, I kind of think it's just that he beat Barboza and got robbed there.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, because he looked fantastic.
Also, I realized he almost has a 500 record, so he's reaching your MJ likability tier, where,
I'm fine with high tier action fighter, but
he has the split with Paul Felder. I don't really remember that fight, to be honest.
I think he beat Felder, right? He got on the right side of that.
Yeah. He has a split win over Felder.
I think at his best, he was
beat
probably
Seaver, who we'll talk about. I just don't feel like he had enough wins, and then he lost to like Trinaldo, Dunham, Al, Quinta, Sanchez. Even though that was a split, that's a Diego Sanchez split decision.
Yeah, Sanchez robbed him.
But it's just, I feel like for contender, you can't lose to guys who are contenders so often.
That's fair.
You know,
I think that's fair.
At some point, you do have to beat another contender for me to feel it.
Yeah. I think he did with Barboza, but he also has like a 1-5 record against solid contenders.
Yeah.
So, I'm fine with it. But super slick boxer. The McDessie fight, actually one of the cooler late career fights for both guys that you could really find. Just super fun boxing match. Kind of the guy who, really made pocket boxing look like a viable game for long periods of time. Like when he came up, it wasn't really a thing that people did at length, but the whole inside slip left hook meme, it worked out a lot.
He had a really storied career too.
Yeah, and also the kind of fighter who to beat him, you actually did kind of have to be good at boxing in a way that a lot of fighters at the time weren't. Really slick rhythm manipulation, drawing him into stuff. Where if you just stood and banged with him, he just left hook you over and over.
Unless you're Cub Swanson, who kind of just was like, I'm a bigger bagger.
Right?
I'm a bigger bagger. Yeah. Okay, we can move on.
This is Tarek Saffiedine. I'm a huge fan of Saffiedine. I think
I'll let you do this one because you're a big Saffiedine guy.
Yeah, I think Saffiedine's kind of a weird fighter because it's hard to put him up in solid contender because he didn't have a ton of the wins. He wasn't really an action fighter, but it feels wrong to put him in fine because he is a fighter who I think skill-wise definitely low-tier solid contender. He got robbed blind against Dong Yun Kim, the welterweight one. Super late in his career, he got straight up RDA Colby in that fight where Kim just kept walking at him and got really clearly outstruck, but he lost on vibes. And then he fought RDA and had a really fantastic fight with a guy who would be a future top contender. I think he's kind of the brainy viewers action fighters. I think the way I put him, cracking leg kicks, really nice boxing in the pocket sometimes, but lost when he got to step up. So I'd put him, in terms of skill, I think he's anywhere up here, but in terms of how his career went, I'd put him somewhere here.
Yeah, I agree. Yep, that's fine. He's underrated just because he has a successful Strikeforce
Strikeforce career, yeah.
and then he comes to UFC and he goes like 2-3 or 2-4. Or
Yeah, he had the
something
Rory
like that.
loss,
I
and
don't
then he got
remember.
unlucky with DHK.
Yeah, he didn't really like. Yeah, it was people didn't see him for his like wins, right?
Yeah.
And even at his best, it was decisions. Like he wasn't a finisher. He wasn't getting highlights, so it's not like he would have been a fan favorite or anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's
That's
a little bit underrated just because of the way his career ended. With that, you know, he wasn't one of the Strikeforce guys who came over and walked right through the yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, speaking of Safadine, for some reason talking about him reminds me that we might have forgotten David Tamer on this. But
oh, we did forget David Tamer. Yes, we did. Okay.
Yeah, I put him up in high tier action fighter too.
Yes, yeah, that's where David Tamer was. He was a good fighter. Sadly, kind of like I guess just stopped competing because he didn't want to anymore.
Yeah, I mean honestly, it's sort of weird because like
good striker, couldn't really grapple David Tamer, but
yeah, I mean he had some. Yeah, I think the weird thing about him is that he had the exact same fight with Charles Oliveira that every single elite fighter did, but before it looked like you could.
It's a little bit fake competitive just because of like the eye pokes and stuff.
Yeah, but I had the knockdown and then he got subbed.
Yeah. The knockdown isn't as bad. Charles is on 1 foot, I think, when he gets knocked down.
He gets intercepted on the middle of the kick.
So it's not like when he got dropped by Dustin Poirier or something where it's like, wow, he got rocked bad. But a super fun fight.
Yeah, but I think
a lot of people have fun fights with Charles Oliveira, but he makes it fun in a lot of ways too.
Yeah, but I think Tamer actually has some real upside if he did, retire. Apparently, it's been 4 years now. Damn, that was the Fortaleza effect.
Yeah.
But next up we have who is this?
I think this is John Hathaway, right? Or is it?
I don't think that's Hathaway.
Is it Sass?
This one might be Sass. Yeah,
okay.
I recognize all these other guys, and I remember putting Sass on. So, yeah, I don't actually know that much about Sass. He was like a leg lock guy, right? He beat Michael Johnson. We had heel hook, but
not much of a. He's like fine. I would say he's like low level fine. He had a short career. He didn't stick around for long. Less than 20 fights. He's still only 34, and he retired. He retired a long time. So he like retired early. I just want to mention him because he was. I remember being younger and people being like excited about him as like a British guy. And then him kind of just saying like, well, I'm done, I'm leaving.
Respect.
And I think he does like coaching now, maybe. I'm not sure, but he heel hooked Michael Johnson, which is he's a trailblazer for beating Michael Johnson with bullshit submissions. He didn't have much of a UFC. He had only a few UFC fights. Lost to Danny Castillo, lost to Matt Wiman, lost to some guys who didn't have much of a UFC career. He was probably like one of the least important inclusions. But I just wanted to prove my cred that I do remember the days of the Paul Sass hype train.
I just know he beat Michael Johnson because they mentioned that in like Johnson's last fight. Like he's been around forever. Remember when he lost to Paul Sass? I'm like, look, who's mentioned Paul Sass in the last 20 years? We're on to Dennis Siver. Pretty clear
solid
fine.
Contender? Oh, you don't think he was solid contender? I was thinking low solid contender because he was like a top 10 featherweight when featherweight was.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's just I never had a really great impression of his game, I guess. He had the nice spinning heel kicks to the body a bunch, but I'm not sure how many really great wins he had. Let me go see.
Yeah,
I remember losing to Cub Swanson.
He doesn't have like great wins. He was kind of like one of those ranked guys who fought a lot of unranked guys, and that's what kept him in the rankings. But he always did a good job against those fighters. Submissions, he was a good. He was able to get good chokes and stuff, and then he had like the nasty spinning back kick. That's like one of the best, most effective spinning back kicks in MMA. He really knew how to use that for his game. He fought good fighters, obviously, like Cub Swanson.
Yeah, he did. He had the McGregor fight. He had Pearson. But I mean, I also feel like he's lost to pretty much every contender he's fought. Like,
that's fair. By the criteria that I mentioned earlier, he never really like beat another contender. So action fighter, that's fine.
Yeah, action fighter. Like the spinning heel kicks put him in action fighter. That's a high tier action fighter.
He was finish oriented, so that's to me an action fighter. Even if he didn't put on like pace, back and forth.
Yeah.
Sergey Spivak is.
We're not doing this.
fine. Here's the thing. Well, we mentioned earlier about like contender. Like obviously he's a contender for a heavyweight because he's, I don't know,
He
4 or
beat
something.
Lewis, but like I don't.
Um,
Yeah.
but to be a solid contender for heavyweight, I need you to be like the first or the second best
Right.
heavyweight. Same thing with light heavyweight too, probably.
Yeah.
Um,
Like I mean, the champion
I
of light
do respect
heavyweights,
Sergey Spivak because he's not very athletic and he can't really strike,
but he
but
does
he
the
is
right stuff.
tough
Yeah.
and he does like a thing which is get on top of people, which is hard for
Yeah.
heavyweights to deal with.
Yeah, he knows
And
where he wins fights.
yeah, he has some ideas about, like not returning guys, and he doesn't waste energy in a really dumb way, and
Yeah.
he tries. And yeah, I respect Sergey Spivak just because he doesn't have much to work with, but he does okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, beat both Tai Tuivasa and Derek Lewis, which is
Yeah.
like guys fail at that all the time. It's really like it's easy to beat them, but it's also really easy to lose. He had that. It's funny because he beat those two guys, but he also got smoked in like 10 seconds by Walt Harris, which really says something about how good Walt Harris is, if you ask me. But yeah, Stefan Struve. So,
This one's interesting because he beat Stipe Miocic,
yeah,
right?
that's
So
what's weird.
yeah. So you're like, well, that's a solid contender because he beat Stipe Miocic.
But he's just never had any success against anyone who could just hit him in the face really hard.
But should we just put him there anyways because he did finish Pat Barry?
I've heard enough. I honestly think he's probably closer to an action fighter just because the Stipe win also
I just don't.
Yeah.
I know it's Stipe. Stipe is maybe the best heavyweight ever. I'd probably say he's the second best heavyweight ever. But I can't count it that much.
It's also a couple of nasty eye pokes. Like that's always been a thing with Stipe.
And it's not like he lost to everyone like decent. He fought at heavyweight, and even guys who weren't really decent.
Yeah, he's just kind of a novelty because he was so huge, but like it's really tough. Like
he's the proto Volkov. Volkov isn't even that good, but he is better than Stefan Struve.
Nordine Taleb.
Yeah, he's a Triforce guy, right? And he's
Triforce.
Triforce, not Triforce. TriStar. He's not from Legend of Zelda.
Triforce, not Triforce.
And he's kind of the classic TriStar guy.
I'd say fine.
Yeah, he's fine.
Yeah. Put him below Shore, probably above Johns.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
And Darren Till, I mean, fake solid contender, fine.
So yeah, this one's interesting because he was like he fought for the belt, and
he's modern tier Dan Hardy. Obviously better than Dan Hardy, but like you have to be better to be modern tier Dan Hardy.
So here's like it's so interesting because the Wonder Boy fight is so bad that people almost don't count it, but technically he beat Wonder Boy, who is in theory a good fighter.
Like I'm fine with him getting the card over Wonder Boy, and honestly, the Whitaker fight, a big
credit. Complained about that so much at the time, and I was like, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Wonder Boy fight is like a 50-49 because there's one round in which anything happens until it's the one who did it. But
yeah,
I guess that's the thing, right? He's sort of really, he is a super matchup reliant fighter who can look really good against pound for pound tier fighters like Robert Whitaker, but also look like complete trash against Dricus du Plessis.
And completely own like Cowboy Cerrone.
Yeah,
like when Cowboy wasn't done, like Cowboy.
Yeah, like he beat Cowboy the way good fighters beat him.
Yeah, it's so interesting. He's so weird. It feels like the thing with him is that he is a solid contender, with like the mind and work ethic of like a French. Yeah. So actually, he should go in French. Put him in French. He's actually
Let's
perfect.
do it. Okay, but I'm not putting him below Cyril Gane.
That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. He's French. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah,
Darren Till is French.
Like I think if I were doing this unironically, I'd say top tier or fine, just because like I feel like he'd beat Jack Hermanson, but it's just so weird. And actually, I'm not sure he'd beat Jack Hermanson.
No, he might get taken down.
Yeah, he'd beat the crap out of Hermanson on the feet. And
it's just like he had a good fight with Robert Whitaker, and he beat Cowboy Cerrone, and he beat Stephen Thompson. It's like
we're trying so hard to downplay him.
He doesn't have a good camp. He doesn't have like that. that effort level to become like consistent in fights.
Yeah, and Woodley's just a straight up gone tier title performance. Like I'm gonna
Yeah,
be
and the
honest, that
Kelvin
was horrible.
Gastelum fight is like the Wonderboy fight without the knockdown, where just nothing
Yeah,
happens for 3
it's
rounds.
so weird because like
Totally.
Till, if you look at his wins, like Cerrone, Gastelum, Wonderboy, that's a good tier of wins, and yet he seems worse on paper than all of them.
Yeah, I mean, because he is, I think.
Yeah, and like him giving Whitaker that fight is honestly the best thing he's ever done in his career, and it's just him being
But by
huge
far,
and a
by far,
southpaw.
it's
Yeah,
like a really close fight. Yeah, and it's like, and also Whitaker, not like
right off the easy fight.
back,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, not. Anyways,
But I mean, I think
yeah.
that fight goes
I feel
weird a
like
lot of
French
the
is a
time
proper
too.
place for him because I feel like French is for people who massively underperform their
Yeah,
like talent level, and that's daring to.
yeah, like French is almost a compliment compared to Fine because guys who are French can be solid contenders, but they
Yeah,
just don't do the right stuff.
yeah. Okay.
Okay, Ilya Topuria, I'd say definite solid
Solid.
contender.
Yep.
I'm not
Um,
sure because I feel like among the featherweights he might be a little bit more
hmm.
exploitable than he looks.
Yeah,
But
there's like the Jai Herbert fight, right? Which makes you
yeah,
like worried about him.
I'd say like
But
he's on par with Giga Chikadze. Chikadze's
yeah,
more tested, but
so he's probably a guy who I think could be like a top solid contender because his age and
yeah,
experience. Like he is still like 26, which is like where I cut off prospects basically.
right.
Um, and it's where I found like is a good place to cut off like a prospect is
Yeah,
26. And he's still 26, so he's like very young still, and
yeah,
his game makes a ton of sense. He's a great athlete. Um, so far, he's been able to use his skill set to beat guys, just being a better boxer, more
yeah.
power, more speed, being a good grappler. He'll have to learn to be smart and use his tools in intelligent ways. But if he can do that, he might not. He seems a bit of a meathead, but
Yeah.
um, if he can one day, contender, maybe great. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with Topuria is also just that the way featherweight's shaken out, it's actually kind of favorable for him because the guys he'd be fighting now are guys like Calvin Kattar and Brian Ortega who are injured and might not come back the same, and those are kind of tricky matchups for him. Just guys who can make I go sicko mode 100% of the time in exchanges look really really dumb all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But as of now, his next opponent is probably like I don't know, maybe
He might fight down just because
yeah,
it's
it's just
what
the way the
what he'll
division
have
is.
to do.
But
So
I actually do think guys like Giga Chikadze and Arnold Allen might be tricky matchups for him. Obviously, Holloway Volkanovski tricky for everybody, but that middle tier, guys like Josh Emmett, um, Yair Rodriguez, those are winnable at least. I feel like Emmett is just kind of like an elevated version of Topuria for now, but I'm not sure because I feel like Emmett and Topuria is just like two guys smashing into each other. But Emmett feels like a craftier version of Topuria who's thought more of his game for now. I'll put it that way. But Topuria has more upside because he's basically where Emmett is, but like a decade younger. So.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Next up, Marvin Vittori. I
Oh
mean, solid contender by most standards, but I just don't want to put him over Fine.
yeah, I'm gonna put him in fine. I don't think he's very good. I've always been very low on Vittori. Um,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
Like,
I've always been very low on Vittori as a fighter. He arm punches. He can't like generate power with his striking. Even his
yeah,
body kick sucks. Even though he's got like he's got huge legs and he's like a giant person. Um, his wrestling is bad, actually. Like it's fake
yeah.
good. It's just he tries hard and he has a
And
gas
wrestled
tank.
Kevin Holland,
And he has
but
a gas tank, but like
yeah,
really he got mounted by Israel Adesanya. Like it's not actually good grappling. He's his camp gives him smart things to do for fights, which
right.
carries him super far. And he's got a great gas tank, and he has an unreal chin. Robert Whitaker
Yeah,
like
Whitaker should have
kicked
finished
the
him.
crap out of him, and he got through it. But Robert Whitaker kicked the crap out of him super bad, and he didn't look even close to the same level as a Robert Whitaker. Um,
Yeah.
Israel Adesanya, people really rag on that fight, and I agree that it's a bad fight, but also
Vittori had basically no success.
had
So.
like no success. Yeah, it's an Anderson Silva like Talis Leitas level fight
Right.
where like I get why Israel decided 2 minutes into the fight that he didn't even need to try because it really is like not even argument for there's like no way for Vittori to win that
Yeah,
fight. He
Vittori
doesn't have
just
a
doesn't have an
single
end game
thing.
in that fight.
Yeah, he doesn't have a single thing he can do to win. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
he's fine. I don't. Middleweight, we talked about with like heavyweight, obviously repeating of like you need to be a solid contender and a heavyweight. I need you to be the first or second best heavyweight. Same thing with light heavyweight. Middleweight is more like 3 to 4. I don't feel like he's the third or fourth best.
Yeah, I think middleweight clearly has like the Pereira. I mean, even Pereira is kind of questionable for other reasons, but Pereira, Adesanya, Whitaker. I think Cannonier is pretty clearly better than Marvin Vettori. Kind of keep getting.
He did way better against Whitaker and Adesanya.
Yeah, so Cannonier is clearly better than Vettori, I think, and I wouldn't be surprised if that fight's next if Vettori gets through Roman Dolidze, who I guess Dolidze should be here, but I have nothing to say about him.
I have nothing to say about Dolidze. All his fights are like random, weird, dumb things. I don't have anything to say.
Trash.
That's why he's not on the thing.
Yeah, we didn't forget about him, I swear. But I think he's probably not better than. I mean, I think even Paulo Costa probably has a little bit more upside in matchups that aren't, like just bad. Like I feel like Costa has a chance of just kicking the crap out of guys, and Vettori has no shot against someone like Romero.
What is a Vettori fight versus a prime Yoel Romero going to look like? It's not going to look like Costa Yoel. And we rated Costa really low on our last year list. We're not big Costa fans.
Exactly.
So we can't be big Vettori fans because he's not even as good as Costa. So I mean,
I think the big thing with Vettori is that he's about as good as he can be in terms of, like he's got all these dumb habits, but he fights like a Cordero fighter at his core, which like you're not really going to get many guys who are better than that. I think that's a point that Ryan's made a couple times, is that you're like Cordero has maximized Vettori. It's just Vettori maxes out somewhere around here. Volkan Oezdemir.
Action fighter, low level one. He's better than Kudelaba at his best.
For sure.
He's around like Danny Roberts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's funny about him is that he has that one fight against Ilir Latifi where he like actually builds on his skill set a little bit. That's cool stuff. But then all his other fights either bonks them in a second or dies a terrible death.
Or like has a really horrible barn burner with Anthony Smith, where they
that was
both
a barn burner. That just made me sad.
It's a barn burner that they both look like they're gonna fall apart at any moment.
Yeah, it's had lots
of
momentum.
They look like a burning barn. That's like that's what I mean.
Yeah, it's just Volkan had like a whole round on top of Smith, just beating him up from Turtle, and then he gassed and died, which is just so humiliating. But we can move on. Tom Aspinall, I'm pretty convinced by Tom Aspinall, I'm gonna be honest. For heavyweight, like I feel like
he's good. I put him in solid contender. I feel like he's probably the best or second best heavyweight, kind of secretly.
The Volkov
maybe not so secretly. I think people are pretty high on him actually.
I put him I think better than I'm not sure.
No, I wouldn't say he's better than those guys.
Somewhere down here.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. We'll see because he's so young and he has a major injury now.
Yeah, I think honestly, like Aspinall versus Blades was probably the fight for the best heavyweight, and obviously went super dumbly. But
well, besides Ngannou.
I mean, in the UFC, right?
Yeah. I mean, John Jones looks fine as a heavyweight. He'll probably be decent.
I mean, I think being gone is weird for a bunch of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying he's definitively worse or better than Aspinall is my point. It's just because, and also young guys, they can have, especially at these divisions, they can have short peaks, peak it really early. I wouldn't be surprised if he, isn't really doing much in 5 fights from now, right? Like he has a 5-fight career of like actually, being at a top 3 in a division. So this, I don't really, with guys this like new and in divisions like this, when we put them in like solid contender or action fighter, it's really like things can move around a lot. Guys' careers can change, but the skill level he's shown so far, I feel fine calling him a solid contender. Yeah.
I mean, I guess my position is the Volkov fight is convincing enough with how Volkov's looked since and before that. Like Volkov is not easy to just completely truck like that. And at that point, I'm convinced that Aspinall is, if he stays at his best, he's going to be something very good. And he's built like a good fighter. He's like what people wanted Cyril Gane to be, a slick striker who's not incompetent on the ground. Like Gane got a couple heel hooks, and people were like, "Wow, he's a grappler too." But Aspinall looks like he can actually do some stuff. But might want to hold my tongue on that too. But now we're on to Mirsad Bektic. This is our final guy. I'd say fine, not built as an action fighter, but not consistent enough to be a contender at all.
He was a top 15 flyweight
or featherweight,
featherweight. But he didn't really beat other contender.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say his best win for sure was Ricardo Lamas.
Yeah, that's definitely his best. Lamas is pretty old by that point, lacking a lot of dynamism, and that's also Lamas's comeback fight from like his horrible
Yeah,
knockout too,
knockout.
right?
Yeah.
Let me just actually double check.
I'm pretty sure it was. I think
Um,
Lamas lost to Emmett
yes, yeah,
Bektik, and
yeah.
then he
So
beat
so
Darren
he's not
Elkins and
even.
lost to
It's like
Cater.
there was like a lack of confidence. I remember when Lamas was coming back from that fight. There was so much talk about like
Yeah.
how is he going to be, because it was such a horrible knockout against Emmett. So yeah, it's even his best win is an older, maybe
Sort of slowing.
yeah, a long layoff, Lamas and everything,
Awful
and then
loss.
he had it's a long long layoff, and then he doesn't really have great wins, right?
Yeah.
It's Lamas, and then like there's nothing really
The win
else
over
to
Elkins
like.
he would have had if he didn't screw that up. But
Yeah, but he did, so you
yeah,
lose,
exactly.
and then he loses to Josh Emmett in like the most obvious way possible. Um, he has the split decision with Dan Ige. I don't actually remember.
I think Ige beat him pretty clearly though. But
Yeah, I don't remember why that was. Was it just because of like control time?
yeah, I
Like,
think Ige
yeah,
got taken down in like round 3 and held, and then he spent the rest of round 3 beating him up. Round 2 was Bektic grappling him, and round 1 was just a mugging by Ige. So it was weird. But yeah, I think Bektic is just kind of weird because like Lamas is the guy who it's like if you're just a complete mental screw up who messes up fights that you're supposed to win, like Lamas will mess you up for that. And that's the one fight where Bektic was just like able to survive all the guillotines and clinch him. Um, but yeah, it's
would
just
you
not a
put
great person.
him lower than Shore and Cape? Do you think? Just because I feel like those guys, they wouldn't lose to like Damon Jackson. Is like my
That's
feeling,
also
right?
true.
Is like those guys would beat Damon Jackson.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's just like I also don't know how like Pat like because that's his last fight, right? And that was like 2 or 3 years ago at this point.
Fight, yeah, and he does the
But
exact same thing again. He loses in round 3 after winning 2 rounds.
yeah, I remember calling that because I remember Damon Jackson getting close to a couple of guillotines in round 1, and I was like, okay, Jackson round 3 submission. Because if Damon Jackson, like if Bektic is in a guillotine at any point in round 1, it's a certainty that he loses to that guillotine in round 3. It's just like he almost had like a Travis Browniness to him, or like he just drift in the direction. I think that's something that that Phil McKenzie said about Travis Brown. He's just drift in the direction of his opponent's best weapons mournfully.
That's a good one, yeah.
And that is what Bektic did with like Emmett's power and with Elkins's freak indestructibility, at least at that point, and with Damon Jackson's weird submissions. That's just what he did. So like at one point, it bears mentioning Bektic looked like one of the best prospects in the game. Like
yeah.
Volkanovski was coming up, and Zabit was coming up, and a bunch of the hipsters were like, "Damn, Mirsad Bektic, he's gonna be the guy." But it didn't pan out. Just didn't have the mind. And I actually remember at one point, one friend of the fight site, Danny Martin, he was like, "Yeah, I think Bektic versus Calvin Kattar would actually be really close, and Bektic might beat him," which it looks less and less likely now just because of the brain difference. But like, I mean to say, like that wasn't a stupid opinion at the time. That's something that you could say perfectly reasonable.
So, no, it probably looked like the Ricardo Lamas Kattar fight, to be honest. Yeah, he was scheduled to fight Moicano twice.
Yeah, that was 231, right? Yeah, that was Moicano was supposed to be the backup for the Holloway Ortega fight.
Yeah, and I think when Moicano first came to the UFC too, they also had a bout. That would have been an interesting fight because Moicano isn't dynamic like that, and Bektic, very physical. But I probably would have picked Moicano to like drop him with a jab or something weird like that, just because he was just. I just don't trust Bektic to ever like do well in a third round. It seems like
Bektic is just not going to deliver.
He just falls apart. Yeah, it's.
I mean, I think we're kind of getting to a matchup with Moicano where he might look dumb for picking him over a wrestler just because like he got taken down a bunch by RDA, but also like
that's
Bektic way less reliable than even someone like Arman Tsarukyan has shown up to this point. So it's tricky, but yeah. Okay. I mean, these guys clearly have a lower class than the Brazilians. No GOAT tiers. Like I guess Conor McGregor.
Well, I would put Conor McGregor in a GOAT. Well, to be honest, the Brazilians, there was also a curve to it. Like I don't know if Figueiredo is a top. I don't think Figueiredo is the top 20 fighter of all time.
Yeah.
He was in GOAT tier. So I do think Charles Oliveira actually is, but that might
Yeah,
be
Oliveira probably. I
controversial.
mean, I think the way I put it is that like if you look at the top goats and maybe the top couple, great but unluckies, those are all like really, really solid top 30 fighters in skill of all time. But here it's a little bit more tenuous. And
Yeah.
I'd say Connor, Leon are like up there. Bisping, not really. Like I love Bisping, but he wasn't
No,
that
Bisping would be
territory.
like the great but
Yeah.
lucky on the Brazilian tier list, 100. Because the Brazilian tier list was filled with champions
Exactly.
who were in just kind of weaker divisions or weaker times. And yeah, Bisping, Jan, they would all have been in like, and Arlovsky would have all have been in
Exactly.
like great but lucky, just because of like weak division.
Yeah, this is just a
Kokop
lot
and
tighter.
Alistair would just be like regular, great. We wouldn't. I don't know where we would have put them, but they would have just been like regular old. Great.
Yeah, I mean, I think just heavyweight we probably would have leaned because that's what we did with a lot of
Yeah,
contemporaries.
that's true.
Yeah. It's just Leon would have been probably not GOAT tier, but maybe a little bit great.
I think it would have been great, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah. I think he sort of straddles the line between unlucky and lucky in the same way as a bunch of guys.
Connor would be a GOAT tier, I think.
Yeah, I think Connor would be low tier, GOAT tier, but
he's probably. I think the Dustin fights have been really tough for his like legacy, just because. You know, Dustin's also one of the most famous fighters of this era, and he, has now beat him like really in really big fights, in like their both their primes. Do you want to? What do you think about? Is it still? Do you think Gamrot should go back to solid contender low now that we've filled out the whole thing, or?
Yeah, I think I kind of feel like it because Gamrot versus like.
Yeah,
Ross
I'm fine
Pearson,
with saying he's like.
Yeah, I'd put him.
Brad Pickett. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, he's just very low on it. I just don't feel like. I feel like he has to get lucky to beat guys who are actually top 10.
Yeah, I think he like swings the scales towards.
And he has gotten lucky, which is like the crazy thing. It's like he got crazy lucky twice to do it.
But yeah, I think it's possible enough that Gamrot just gets a matchup that makes him look fine, but also that he just gets a bunch of matchups that make him look like really, really awful, and we're going to have to wait. But yeah, I think Gamrot, he's good enough to be solid contender, but he might not have the results, and I'm pretty sure.
I still am just thinking about Carlos Diego Ferreira and how much better I think that guy is.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I would have put Ferreira up in solid contender too.
Yeah, maybe. Okay, everyone go back and go back to the result and imagine we put Carlos Diego Ferreira in low solid contender, because now I can't stand the idea of Gamrot being higher.
Yeah, but everyone remember, Guram Kutateladze is somewhere over here, and David Tamer is somewhere over here.
Yep. Yeah. I would put Guram. I'd put Guram by like Aspinall, Jiri, Gustafsson, all that stuff, just because it has like no fights.
He's very good, but he just.
He's like Aspinall.
Pretty much.
But in a good division. And with a beard.
And less further along, but probably beat a better fighter. Well, Gamrot versus Volkov, I'm not actually sure. I think Gamrot's better than Volkov, but so thank you for joining us, everybody.
We probably forgot some names that some people might like, but these are the guys we could feel good saying stuff about.
I feel bad about Guram and Tamer, but otherwise everyone else, I'm sure I'll remember someone, but yeah.
Okay,
all right.
Bye.
Well, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.